Nick, you're muted.
Of course. Well, at least get that out of the way early. Well, hi again, everyone. Thank you for joining the third quarter meeting of the California Water Quality Monitoring Council. My name is Nick Martirano. My pronouns are he, him, and I am the director for the California Water Quality Monitoring Council. Thank you all for joining us this morning on our meeting that's going to be focused primarily on environmental DNA, where we are, where we've come, and hopefully where we are going, where we can go, and how the council can ultimately help move that process forward. So we'll be hearing from several great speakers today from the national level scale, the state scale, and from our own molecular methods work group. So should be a really great meeting for those that are really interested in environmental DNA and some of the emerging methods and information coming from that. So first, a little bit of housekeeping. So this meeting is being recorded. So please mute your mics until you're called upon or until you'd like to speak. If you'd like to speak, please feel free to raise your hand. I'll be trying to monitor the chat while also running the meeting. If you feel comfortable, please put your camera on. It makes the presentation a little bit more relatable when the camera's on, and the recording will be a little bit nicer too when it's posted to YouTube. I'm going to start off with roll call for council members and alternates that are here. And for anyone that is not a council member or alternate, please go ahead in the chat, put in your name, if you'd like, your preferred pronouns, as well as your affiliation, and if you would like why you're attending today, if this is your first time. I'd like to kind of keep track of that and understand who's interested in the council. Finally, I'll review the agenda, see if there's any adjustments, and announce that the action items which were distributed to the council ahead of time are considered final with no comments received. So first, I'll start off with the roll call. I'll start with Cali, PA. I saw that Bill jumped on quickly. I'm not sure if he can stay for very long. Let's give him a chance to quickly introduce himself. He might be muted. Well, Phil Crater is here. There is a high priority meeting occurring today that both Phil and Greg will be attending. It's a management committee meeting that's of higher priority at this time. So he will only be on for a short amount of time, and Greg will not be here. So we will be without that side of the co-chair or the bulk of the meeting, unfortunately. But luckily, the meeting is recorded for just that reason, and I can provide a brief to Phil after the meeting and get some feedback, and I'll share it all with you following that discussion. Moving down the list, the Natural Resources Agency is Jen or Caitlin on?
Caitlin's here.
Great, thanks, Caitlin. Present. Drinking water. No, Andrew can't make it, but I believe Christine is here.
Hi, I'm here for Andrew Altivote.
Thanks, Christine. Thanks for making it.
You're welcome.
California Department of Public Health. Anthony messaged me that he couldn't make it, but I'm not sure if Dave and Nazira, they likewise have a offsite meeting in the Bay Area. So they may not be here. I'm not seeing Dave. Regulated community public treatment works systems wastewater.
Lorian Photo here.
Thanks, Lorian. I saw Sam was here as well, which is great. Regulated community stormwater.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Good morning, everyone. Grant Sharp with Orange County Public Works representing regulated stormwater community.
Thanks, Grant. Morning. And I see Brian's on as well. Thanks for both showing up. You want to say something, Brian? Saw you came off.
Yeah, Brian Lawrence and Larry Walker Associates for municipal stormwater.
Great, thank you. Agriculture, so Mark was on.
Yes, thanks, Mark Cady, California Department of Food and Agriculture.
Thanks, Mark. Community monitoring, I've spoke to Helen, she couldn't make it, and then unfortunately Mary Ann had a last minute situation with family, so she can't make it either. So unfortunately we're without representation from the community monitoring sector. But again, I will brief them on any information and talk to them afterwards. But public, I thought Ray was on.
Hi, everyone. Ray Heimster with Orange County Coastkeeper, representing the public.
Thanks, Ray. Does Fred make it today? Let's see. Not seeing him.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh.
Fred Briones, NorCal representative, Big Valley, Pomo tribal member. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Thanks for making the time. Appreciate it. Scientific community, non-academic. Steve
That'll
or
be
Ken?
Steve Weisberg. Good morning. Steve Weisberg, Southern California Coastal Water Research Project Authority.
Morning, Steve. Thank you. Scientific community, academic. Krista.
Krista Kamer, California State University Council on Ocean Affairs, Science and Technology.
Morning, Krista. Thank you. And water supply. Saw Peter.
Now, good morning, everybody. This is Peter Vroom, City of San Diego Public Utilities, representing the water supply sector.
Thanks, Peter. And lastly, US EPA.
Good morning, everybody. This is Eric Dubinsky from US EPA Region 9.
Thanks, Eric. And Phil, I saw you came off camera or on camera. Did you want to say something quickly? I mentioned that you might be leaving rather quickly. So
hi, Nick. No, I'm here for a little while this morning. Glad to see everybody. Phil Crater with State Water Board Division of Water Quality.
thanks, Phil. All right, moving on. And thank you for those that have been populating the chat that are non-council members and alternates with your name affiliation. Appreciate it. As far as the agenda, we'll quickly go through that. We're going to have a public forum following this housekeeping item. And then we're going to get started with a round robin of council member updates, followed by the executive director updates, or just director updates, followed by a presentation from Kelly Goodwin, Dr. Kelly Goodwin from the National Oceanic Administration and Ocean Exploration. Then we'll be hearing from Dr. Susie Thoreau from SQUIRP, and also the head of our molecular methods workgroup, followed by a presentation from Pike Spector, the biodiversity program manager at the Ocean Protection Council, and lastly, Lindsay Metz from our swamp CMAP program. And then the final item will be really a discussion on eDNA, the future of it, and how the council can play a role in moving that forward, which is really kind of the focus that we'd like to kind of walk away with some sort of action items for me to take on in the interim, whether that be a resolution or a letter of support or whatever. We kind of decide when we have that discussion, and that might require a follow-up meeting internally as well. With that, are there any adjustments that we need to make to the agenda from the council members before moving on? Go ahead and raise your hand or make a message. Not seeing any, so I'll go ahead and move on. And the action items are final. I didn't receive any comments, but if somebody does review them and see something, please feel free to reach out. Moves on to item 2, the public forum. So this is a chance for the members of the public to speak to the council on any items that are not on the agenda currently. Cynthia Fan is here with her hand up, and I will go ahead and ask her to unmute. And
great. You can hear me okay?
Yep, hear you great. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good morning, everyone. Let me give a brief summary before I introduce myself. I'm here to ask for your help protecting California's water from plastic grass pollution. Plastic grass, also known as artificial turf, is spreading across our state, and I want you to help our elected officials slow down this trend. My initial hope was that as a water quality monitoring council, you could find a way for yourselves or another reputable entity to get the water quality monitored downstream from a modern plastic field installation, and publish confirmation that it does indeed add microplastics and toxic chemicals like PFAS to the water. But since that monitoring may not be possible for you to arrange, my other idea is that I provide you with additional data to review later on, and then you or the organizations that you represent publish guidance for elected officials, recommending that for the safety of our water, plastic grass no longer be installed. The State Department of Toxic Substances Control is evaluating plastic turf right now. They're closing public comments next Monday, so please consider submitting your feedback to them. But the thing is that since their finalized conclusions probably won't come out for a good while still, we could use your help persuading Californians to slow down their plastic grass purchases now. A little backstory on myself. I am not in your field. I'm a computer scientist by trade. I'm a mom. I moved to California from Flint, Michigan, and given the water crisis there, risk of my kids unknowingly consuming contaminated drinking water will always be among my greatest health concerns. I'm also watching multiple other crises unfold on our planet: a plastics crisis, a PFAS crisis, and a climate crisis. I'm aware that as an individual, my personal green habits have little beneficial impact on the environment as a whole. So I'm leveling up. I've joined other citizens across the state in advocating for local governments, meaning our schools, cities, and counties, to stop purchasing plastic grass. They can role model more sustainable choices. Some of the agencies currently considering it include City of Los Angeles, City of Sunnyvale, County of Santa Clara, and Town of Los Gatos. This movement has real momentum. There are now probably close to 100 nonprofits on board, including Surfrider, which one of your council members mentioned to me last night. If our local governments choose to stop installing plastic grass, we effectively stop chunks of public funding from going to the fossil fuel industry, given that plastics are derived from fossil fuels. And we also stop a source of water pollution. Like I said, there's evidence that plastic grass releases microplastics and toxic chemicals like PFAS into the environment. Cost-effective, environmentally sustainable alternatives to plastic grass exist. For non-functional areas, native and drought-tolerant living plants are ideal. For sports fields and recreation areas, well-managed natural grass is a feasible option, proven by soil scientists to be able to withstand high use with economical maintenance if done properly. As part of our environmental advocacy, we've presented our elected officials with compelling data. I'll give you 3 examples. Number 1, last year, a study was published reporting high concentrations of plastic grass fibers now found in seawater. Also, researchers at Tahoe Environmental Research Center have found plastic grass fibers in Lake Tahoe. Number 2, a major newspaper ran a story recently with quotes from experts explaining how councils are being greenwashed into buying plastic turf products marketed as PFAS-free that are not actually PFAS-free. And number 3, just last month, the state of Rhode Island did its own tests and found indeed that the PFAS in the well water down gradient of a new plastic field had doubled and was found to exceed state drinking water standards. Even with strong evidence like this, many elected officials struggle to weigh this data against industry claims. Faced with industry's conflicting interpretations of test data, we see a lot of elected officials kind of throwing up their hands, not knowing who to trust, and deciding to defer, waiting for state guidance before taking action. This delay is perpetuating the spread of plastic grass. My understanding is PFAS is used in the manufacturing process to make the plastic grass fibers slip off the molds. One of the leading experts on the subject, Dr. Graham Peasley at University of Notre Dame, explained in a recent webinar that there is no way to make plastic grass without PFAS. And of course, we all know there is no way to make plastic grass without plastic. That alone should be enough for our local governments to stop installing it. Plastic pollutes along its entire life cycle, from the site of manufacture to the site of use to the site of disposal. And one of the things environmental justice organizations are fighting right now to get into the UN's Global Plastics Treaty is a reduction in plastic production. Right here is a great way for local governments to role model reducing reliance on plastics. We can reduce plastic production by saying no to non-essential plastics like bags, bottles, straws, and now plastic grass. We just need our elected officials to have the confidence that rejecting plastic grass is a meaningful move. They need guidance from scientists like you and the organizations that you represent. My ask is that your council and your organizations consider publishing guidance discouraging continued installation of plastic grass across California. Thanks so much for the consideration, and maybe you have other ideas of ways that you could help. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. I'll open it up to council members and or alternates to have a chance to respond. Lorian.
Cynthia, thanks for bringing up this important topic. As you know, the council doesn't itself do advocacy, but many of the council members can do advocacy in their day jobs. I'm the executive director of the Bay Area Clean Water Agency, so we're the municipal wastewater group, but we're closely affiliated. Many of our members are stormwater groups as well. We're involved with the San Francisco Estuary Institute, that's a leading regional hub for microplastics research. They have a microplastic strategy that's funded by the Ocean Protection Council, and public involvement is part of that plan. So I'm going to share a link in the chat that takes you to their page, and you can follow up to get more information. And so they do monitoring, but the purpose of the monitoring they do is to inform policy decisions. And I know that community involvement is very welcome in that group.
Thank you. Thanks, Lorian. I also just wanted to, before I pass it over to Caitlin, I also want to say that this was really in line with one of the presentations that your alternate Sam shared with, controlling PFAS sources in wastewater. I know PFAS sources in general, also in stormwater, are a big issue. So, this is an additional source that may not have been considered, would be a great linkage for you to pursue, would be also the regulated community as supporters that can reach up into the legislature and provide support. Because obviously it's in their best benefit to eliminate as many sources as possible of these pollutants.
And SFEI is actually embarking on a 3-year study on PFAS sources to stormwater right now. And so that's another nexus. So I encourage you to follow up with them.
Thanks, Lauren. Caitlin.
No, thank you, Lauren. You exactly spoke to the project. I was going to make sure, Cynthia, you're aware of it. Certainly isn't the immediate policy recommendation piece. Of course, monitoring, it takes time for the data analysis, but that is one piece that's certainly within the purview of those in this council, and that we're actively advancing through SFEI, through a number of state scientists and experts related to microplastics monitoring, as well as larger sources of plastic pollution in various waters. And so just want to say thank you, certainly encourage your engagement in that piece. Cannot speak to the immediate advocacy, as Lauren alluded to, within the context of this council, but just want to say thank you for your comment, and that what was shared via email will also be shared with the science team on the monitoring plan, which could include certainly special studies or just larger coordinated state monitoring when it comes to specific sources and tracking what the state is doing on the local, regional, state level to reduce and hopefully not proliferate plastic pollution. So thank you.
Hello, this is Fred Briones. I wanted to just chime in on the conversation here and thank the speaker for bringing that topic of plastics, microplastics to us. We had a meeting a few months ago in terms of microplastics. But here, like they're saying, the Water Monitoring Council, we don't have much control over that. So I want to recommend the speaker to attend the SB 54 through Cal Recycle meetings. And I'm an advisory board member there for the disadvantaged low income rural community most affected by the plastic pollution. And your comments there, I think there would be more impactful. There's also a board member from the Surfrider Foundation, which you mentioned is on SB 54. So please come to those SB 54 meetings. And just to let everyone know that in 2027, there will be a substantial amount of money, $5 billion available to create a plastic mitigation plan related to the environment, health effects to people, for researchers. So maybe we could work on something like that there. But I think as we all understand that the microplastics is an issue, and we see it on the TV now, or it's even in the brain now. They say the microplastics, and maybe the council could really take an initiative on creating safe water drinking standards in the state of California. They talked about it at our meeting a few months ago, but really putting the foot down there, around there, safe water drinking standards for microplastics. I think that's where maybe we could be impactful with some kind of data. And again, there's going to be money here real soon for those kinds of works. So just my comment. So again, to the speaker, join the SB 54 meetings. The next meeting is in October 11th at 10 a.m. at the EPA building in Sacramento. So, or you can join Zoom. So thank you.
Nick, you're muted.
Thanks, Fred, and thanks, Lauren. I just wanted to say that the information you share with SB 54 is linked to the Ocean Protection Council effort that was mentioned by Lauren, and there's also a microplastics subcommittee of the trash work group under the council that has worked really hard to kind of coalesce around microplastics monitoring and helped actually create some of the standards that are in effect in the Division of Drinking Water around microplastics that come out of public water systems. but I appreciate that information. If Cynthia, if you need help finding the information, I can share you. I'll look it up and send you an email where the SB 54 information is.
Thank you.
Ray.
Cynthia, I just want to say thanks for bringing this up. You never know who you're going to reach when you do a public comment like this. So certainly the Monitoring Council can't do advocacy, but my group certainly can. And while I've been involved with PFAS on both the public health and monitoring side, I hadn't really thought of it in related to plastic grass. And I love the term plastic grass rather than artificial turf because it really brings out what it is. So I said, I just want to thank you for bringing this up, and also thanks, for I forget who it was who posted the link to the comment period. I may even get in a comment letter on this. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ray, and thanks again, Cynthia. And I will say that while we can't advocate to the legislature directly as a council, individual members can, as was brought up, and as a council as a whole, and as the director of the council, there are some tools that we have, like, for example, if you and your team of advocacy groups were going for grant funding to support monitoring efforts, to help collect data and build a case to support the banning of plastic grass or artificial turf, and you needed a letter of support, that's something that we can help provide as a council. If I get buy-in from the council members, I can write a letter to support that can help you get grant funding. We also have the ability to make recommendations to the agency secretaries when we have some solid information. So if the DTSC goes through and there's a high priority movement from the council, we can provide recommendations to the secretaries of the Cal EPA and Natural Resources Agency. So I really appreciate your time and effort in reaching out and providing this information, and hope to be in touch. And hopefully some of the information I provided from our Contaminants of Emergency Concern Unit in the Division of Water Quality is helpful, and some of these other efforts can help move this issue forward. But again, appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Oh, any other public forum commenters before we move on? Not seeing any. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to item 3, which is council member and director updates. We'll start with council members. I'm not sure if Phil is still here, but I'll give Phil a chance because I know his time is short. Phil, do you have any updates from Cal EPA or Division of Water Quality that you wanted to share with the council?
Nick, I don't have any updates today. I'm still on the
totally
sort of intro steep end of the learning curve here, but I'm glad to listen, and I did appreciate the public comments as well today. So thanks, Nick.
Yeah, no problem. Caitlin, anything from the Natural Resources Agency or Ocean Protection Council?
Sure. Specific to the Ocean Protection Council, we're just initiating our next 5-year strategic planning process. That would be our current plan goes through 2025. So this may be the first of many quarterly, potential opportunities to flag this opportunity for engagement. We're looking at initiating a public process for our strategic planning process in 2025. After that plan would go from 2026 through 2030, which is pretty important for us given the state's 30 by 30 initiative to conserve 30% of the state's lands and waters by 2030. That's OPC is within the purview of advancing 30 by 30 in coastal waters for the state. And so that is a new initiative that certainly emerged since the development of our strategic plan our current strategic plan that was adopted in 2020, and has become a pretty central focal point of nesting a lot of our different initiatives across OPC. And so I just wanted to flag that now as we're looking to 2030, what does that look like in our strategic planning? So that's our flag. We just had our first council meeting that we introduced our strategic planning process, and that will be gaining significant momentum in the first half of 2025.
Great, thanks, Caitlin. And when you have that information on public participation, please share it with me and I'll send it out to our listserv. So I appreciate that. Let's see. How about Christine? Anything from drinking water you want to share?
Hi, I don't have anything specifically from Andrew, but I do have something from ELAP, which I'm the manager for. So I just want to let everyone know, we were just talking about microplastics. We have recently accredited 2 laboratories to test for microplastics in California. So one nonprofit and one, so that's More Plastic Institute, and another commercial laboratory. So this is in anticipation of the microplastics testing in drinking water systems that was required under, I forget what the Senate bill was. So they're going to be required to test drinking water in water systems. I think it's next year. So we're gearing up to get more laboratories accredited. So I just wanted to let everyone know about that.
Thanks, Christine. That's great news. And for those that aren't aware, the ELAP is Environmental Lab Accreditation Program and sets the standards for labs to meet for regulatory purposes. And More Plastic Institute, which is great to hear that they were accredited, is a lot of their staff are key participants and leaders on our trash and our microplastic subcommittees under the council. So we already have a relationship with them for anybody interested in joining those work groups. Lorian or Sam, anything from the POTWs?
I'll go and then give Sam a chance.
Okay.
So first of all, I just wanted to say that due to a confluence of different requirements, including the sewer system or the WDR for sanitary sewer systems, as well as an initiative from the State Water Board on a needs assessment, wastewater agencies are pulling together boundary maps for their collection systems and their POTW service areas, which seems crazy that in this day of big data that such things don't exist yet, but they don't. So this is a really handy thing to have. VACWA actually got the lead on this. And I'll share a link in the chat afterwards so you can take a look. We posted it on our new Baywise website that's aimed at pollution prevention. If you scroll down, you can see a map that allows you to click on any location in the Bay Area. It'll tell you where your POTW and your collection system, what agencies run your POTW and your collection system. So exciting times. I'm going to punch it over to Sam to give a quick update on an important PFAS in wastewater study that's been going on at UCI.
Yeah, thanks, Lorian. Yeah, this is real quick. As Nick and Lorian had mentioned, there was a study done at UCI where they looked at PFAS in residential areas. Specifically, they looked at 3 different cities here in Orange County, essentially doing source attribution to see where the majority of the PFAS was coming from residential households. So to sum it up, so there were 3 main categories. It was laundry, shower, and urine. I believe the final report is out there. So if anyone's interested, let me know and I can share that with you. That's it. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you so much. Yeah, please share the study with me if you haven't already. Really interesting. And I'm really excited too, Lorian, about the mapping of the boundary areas of the wastewater treatment plants. That's a huge gap in data that it's crazy to think that we didn't have it, but that would be a huge piece of helping to analyze many things, but including some of our racial equity analyses. So I think we appreciate the wastewater agencies taking that on. Next, let's hear from Grant and Brian.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nick. I'll go first and then hand it over to Brian. Just a couple updates. The California Stormwater Quality Association's 20th annual conference is coming up in October, 21st through the 23rd. It will be at the Sacramento Convention Center, the Safe Credit Union Convention Center, on those dates. And the theme of this year's conference is Inspiring Solutions Together. So I'll look forward, hopefully, to seeing a number of you at the CASPA conference in a few weeks. And then other update I wanted to just share with council members and everyone else on the meeting is the Southern California Stormwater Monitoring Coalition is in the process of developing a new 5-year research agenda. And every 5 years, the way they go about that is the team at SQUIRP, Steve's staff who support the Stormwater Monitoring Coalition, they gather a panel of subject matter experts on a variety of different topics from around the country. They locked them in a room at SQURP, not literally, figuratively, of course, for about 2.5 days. And the result is usually typically 25 to 30 projects, which then get placed on that research agenda for the Stormwater Monitoring Coalition to pursue over the next 5 years. This year's panel was a really impressive group. I was very fortunate to be invited to participate, not as an expert, but as a representative of the regulated member agencies of the Stormwater Monitoring Coalition. I was joined by my colleague Ivar Ridgway with the Los Angeles Water Board, representing the regulated member agencies of the Stormwater Monitoring Coalition. It was just such a wonderful experience to be in a room with experts on so many different subjects for 2.5 days. By the end of the first day, we had, I think, a total of 59 projects that had been brainstormed. By the second day, that had been narrowed down to 35 or so. And then I think we ended up with a total of 25 different projects in 6 different research thematic areas. And while the write-up on these projects is still underway, and there's really no draft of that research agenda to share, not even with the Stormwater Monitoring Coalition yet, I just want to let you all know that I think this council will be very pleased with a number of the projects that I anticipate will end up on that research agenda. There were a number of projects in the category of data, new technology and communication, which I think will be of direct interest to this council because they align very well, in my opinion, with the objectives of this body. So it was just a wonderful experience to be part of, and I think you all will be very pleased with some of the projects. Look forward to the SMC being able to share that research agenda with the Monitoring Council, and that's all the updates I have. I'll hand it over to Brian.
Yeah, I don't have much to add besides emphasizing that the Casca, those of you in Northern California, the Casca conference next month also includes field tours. I think there's someone from Sac Sewer on, Charmaine, but that's one of the even though it's a stormwater conference, there's a tour down at the new facility in Sacramento, wastewater treatment plant. And I'm giving a talk too on high resolution mass load calculations for stormwater.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Grant. Mark, anything from the agricultural side of things?
I thought I'd make a comment on the, PFAS has come up several times in the last few minutes, and it's becoming more and more interesting to agriculture as we're seeing agricultural land actually impacted by PFAS to the extent on the cutting edge, actually, is the state of Maine, where some small family dairies have been shut down because of PFAS contamination. As you probably know, PFAS, once it's in soil, it can be taken up by plants, and the plants consumed by animals and concentrated in milk and meat. The state of Maine is in the position of buying farmland to compensate family farms for losing their livelihoods. And the one of the major sources is a biosolid, decades and decades of biosolid application to land. And so, yes, agriculture in California is becoming very interested, at least at the agency level, in the process that takes place in terms of concentration in biosolids and application to land, which has also been happening in California for decades. The other comment is just to recognize that we're marking the 10th year of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And so there's a lot of agency activity around it. In fact, it's State Board and DWR mostly, but of course, agriculture is highly impacted and interested in what is now becoming the implementation phase, which means there's a lot of monitoring happening both in terms of water quantity and water quality on farms with focusing on groundwater, but also across the state or across those impacted groundwater basins. So yeah, that's it.
Thanks for that, Mark. Lorian, I see your hand is up.
Sorry, I needed to clarify about the situation in Maine is those farms that were highly impacted. It was actually pulp and paper mill biosolids and sludge, not only municipal wastewater. So it's not exactly an apples to oranges comparison.
Right. And there's also, there's firefighting and military bases, airports. There are a lot of sources, but it's
something to keep an eye on in California. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
Appreciate that. Ray, and then Fred.
Sure. So I've been working with the California Coastkeeper Alliance on a campaign to promote inland waters monitoring for recreational purposes, and to eventually get the council the funding that it needs to provide guidance on that monitoring. So it'll be a long process, and but we'll see what we can do. So thank you.
Appreciate that, Ray. Thank you. Fred, do you have anything to update the council on beyond what you already did on the SB 54?
No, nothing. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. Let's see. Steve, I think from SQUIRP and the scientific community.
So I wanted to let you know about something I think will be a great potential meeting item in the future. The West Coast Ocean Alliance, of which California is a part, is developing a West Coast-wide report card. Basically, it's how do we take all the data that's being collected and summarize it into a way that is understandable by a legislative or management community. There'll also be some other pieces to it, particularly a website that will provide a lot of access or I should say pointers to data. It will also include a lot of more in-depth analysis intended for the scientific community. But the starting point is basically a two-pager that's being put together that a manager could hand to a legislator or legislative assistant and say, here's the latest assessment for this particular topic. In addition to what is being done by the West Coast Ocean Alliance, the West Coast Ocean Alliance includes the states and tribes on the West Coast. Each of the states has indicated an interest in essentially dovetailing with this work and tailoring a little bit for the particular state. The state of California, particularly through the Ocean Protection Council providing funding to the Ocean Science Trust, is way ahead of the other states in essentially tailoring the effort and basically walking in lockstep with the West Coast Ocean Alliance. The products right now, between the two coordinated efforts, we've probably got about a dozen indicators that are in, I would call medium to late stage, where we have active working groups that are meeting on a regular basis to bring them to some level of closure. The Ocean Protection Council is planning to take some of that work and present it to the council as part of their annual report. I think, Caitlin, in February. And then to update it again by the end of the year, which is the end of next year, end of 2025, which is the same schedule the West Coast Ocean Alliance is. I think the council could easily devote an entire day to hearing about these things. Moreover, one of the reasons that this effort is being done is because it helps us not only just know what we have, but it also tells us what we don't have. What were the pieces of information that we didn't feel we had to do an indicator right? Obviously, within California, what can we do to improve that? Part of that would also be what can we do to develop consistency across states in how these data are collected and put together so that we can look at state-to-state assessments. So timing for this, it's possible. I'd probably ask Caitlin what she would want to do because it dovetails into things that she's going to be putting out in the public process in February, whether she wants to use the council for earlier process or she wants to maybe do it in March after she's put together a product. But I don't think you could find something more central to what the council does. Moreover, particularly, neither of us has gotten very far with the assessments of what else needs to be done, and having some council involvement in that, I think, would be great.
Now, as nodding and Steve, you're correct. The interim preliminary, I don't call it, well, semi-preliminary indicators, a smaller suite will be presented in February of this year, but the full report card will be a public-facing dashboard with a lot of interactive, tools, data sources, et cetera, that will be finalized and released end of 2025, potentially, developed by end of 2025, potentially public released early 2026. And that's the larger effort. So that's where I'll connect internally, but I do think potentially in mid 2025 of next year, as that report card is actively being developed, could be an excellent agenda topic for this council. It's still in development, but beyond the 2024 preliminary indicator phase.
Great, thank you both. I will make a note of that for a potential topic for mid next year, Q2 of next year. Krista, I think from...
Thanks, Nick.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nick. And before I do my update, I would love to have a discussion of the report card. That would be great. Some of you know, or many of you know, that we have formed a post-fire water quality impacts subcommittee. It's Greg Gearhart, Fred Briones, Helen Fitanides, and me, and Nick joins our meetings. And so we have identified folks that are experts in different public sectors and who have expertise on different topics. So we envision inviting 12 people to be this team of experts that will lead the development of a concept paper. And then they will each also bring in additional experts who will contribute. So we've started inviting folks. We have a lot of acceptances so far. We're, of course, behind schedule. It's going very slowly, but it's launched. So I'll keep updating you guys on that as the year goes by. Thanks.
Thank you. It's been a great effort. I appreciate your leadership on that. Peter Vroom.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'll provide a few updates on the equity work group. We met about a month ago, I guess, and I'm very excited because we were having some issues trying to get people to volunteer to be co-chairs. One of our co-chairs had left, so we only had one left. We put out, or Nick helped us put out an email, and we had 4 volunteers which were interviewed. And based on that, Vicky, who is the existing co-chair, is going to accept 2 additional co-chairs. So it'll be led by 3 people, which is spectacular because these people have a bunch of great ideas that I think is really going to help push this equity work group along. One of the people who has already been voted in is Charming Evelyn, and she is currently the Sierra Club Water Committee Chair, and she has some great contacts, and because of her, we actually were able to, at the last meeting, have a discussion specifically regarding the land acknowledgements that many of our meetings start with these days. There was concern that these are just going to become rote and they've lost their meaning. And so with Charming's help, Crystal Moreno, who is from the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians, came to kind of discuss her feelings and thoughts about the land acknowledgements. And based on some of her concerns and ideas, I think that we're going to be suggesting making some potential changes to the land acknowledgement that's given in the equities working group, but that could also be used by some of the other working groups in the council. Another thing that we discussed is we typically only have about 15 participants coming to the equity meetings at this point in time, but there's over 800 people on the list that have expressed interest in wanting to participate. So how do we increase the numbers of people that are actually coming to the meetings, since there obviously is a wide interest? And part of that obviously is going to be providing interesting content to the meetings. And so we were discussing some new ideas that we could have for lectures or presentations. This last group, we did have a woman by the name of Paula Boylan, who is a senior planner for the city of San Diego, give a presentation on the environmental justice element of the city of San Diego's general plan. And there was a fair amount of interest in how some of those ideas can be incorporated by other groups into their long-term visions and things like that. So that's kind of a brief update of our meeting. We really encourage council members as well as members of other working groups to participate in the equity work group. We think that there's a lot of great stuff going on. And with that, I will turn the floor back over to the next council member.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for that update. Yeah, I was really excited about that. Eric, anything from US EPA you want to share?
I'll share that EPA recently released the results from the 2022 National Lakes Assessment. So this is part of the EPA and National Aquatic Resource Surveys that happen every 5 years in lakes across the conterminous US. And I'll post this in the chat. There's an interactive report, which I think does a good job summarizing the national level data. The report doesn't do statewide summaries. It only goes down to eco-regional scale. But I think there's some nice ways that the report presents the information that might be useful in thinking about California specific report cards. Some of the results are sobering. Nutrients are a major problem. Not surprisingly, nationally, about 50% of our lakes across the country are impaired in some way or are showing environmental damage due to high nutrient levels. PFAS, as discussed earlier in the meeting here, is a prevalent problem being detected in 95% of our lakes. So this gives some context nationally to some of the pollutant issues that we have across the country, and worth taking a look at. That's all the update I have.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it. All right, moving on, and I'll be quick for the sake of time so we can get to our first speaker. My updates. So the first one that's important and coming up soon is that there is going to be the California Water Data Consortium, of which I'm a steering committee co-chair, recently hired a new CEO in Robin Grimm. And one of her first actions is to host an open house on October 23rd from 9 to 10 a.m. There's a registration link here, and I can share it in the chat. And it's really a way to kind of re-engage since the consortium has sort of been on hiatus since about mid-March due to the need for Tara to pull back from her CEO position and then to look for a new one. So it's an opportunity to meet with Robin, to hear her vision, to ask questions about the consortium, where it's going. And then following that hour open house, we'll roll right into a 2-hour steering committee meeting that is also open to the public, but kind of gets into the details. But it's a great opportunity for the council to re-engage with the consortium. As I said, I sit on the steering committee representing the council, but it's a great opportunity just to kind of see what they're up to and share the information across your sectors. Another thing that I had updated last time, I was really excited about the My Water Quality webpage updates, which I was hoping would be done by this meeting. Unfortunately, there's a few work groups that are really central to our system, primarily the harmful algal blooms network that due to the sampling and just some miscommunication, they're having trouble making the updates they deem necessary. So we're hoping by the end of October, we will have the web page is done and the DIT can give them a last once over, and we can have them available for the public to review and start providing feedback. So I'm really hoping by our next meeting in December that they're ready, and we've actually had some feedback loops at that point. Another piece of my work, I've been working a lot on the racial equity data handbook at the water boards. We're moving the information onto a public platform via GitHub. We're getting really close to having a version of that to be shared for feedback as well. And it's really aimed at providing guidance to folks engaging in racial equity data analyses and cross-references some existing tools and other resources. But it's been a big effort of mine, along with some others, Anna Holder and Devin Burke within the Office of Information Management Analysis. So we're excited about that coming out soon, and I will share it as soon as it's ready. And then lastly, I've been working a lot with the National Monitoring Conference. I'm the EPA Region 9 state representative on that national level monitoring council, and working heavily on the planning for the 2025 monitoring conference, which will be happening in Green Bay, Wisconsin in March. We have several the abstracts has closed. We're developing sessions now. There's several great speakers from California there, including one from Anna Holder on the work that's been done on the safety work group. So exciting stuff there, and hopefully registration information will be coming out soon, and I'll share that as well. Any questions before moving on to the speakers? All right, hearing none, I'm gonna go ahead and hand it over to Gilly Goodwin from NOAA
Oh,
to talk.
sorry,
Oh, sorry, I don't see.
I just had a totally random thought, and Steve, you might be interested in this. I don't know why this just came to mind, but there might be like an unprecedented event, opportunity to sample water quality in LA County around the Olympics. I don't know why that just popped into my head, but I thought that might be of interest, in particular to Squirt, but to the council as well. So, we've never seen anything like that here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not in 40 years.
Yeah, I know that.
Thanks.
Thanks, Krista. I'll work back to that at the end after hearing from the speakers, but there are some efforts being done in the Safe to Drink work group around that space. But with that, I'll turn it over to Gilly Goodwin at the National Oceanic Administration to give a talk about the White House strategy on aquatic eDNA. Thanks for joining us, Kelly.
Thanks. Before I share my screen, I see that there was the enlightenment and awareness, and I'm also hoping to actually get a little feedback, make this a stakeholder engagement or interested party engagement opportunity for us. So let's see, sharing the screen. It's PowerPoint. Can you guys see this?
We do.
Great. So thanks for this opportunity to give you an update today on the United States National Aquatic eDNA Strategy. I would like to acknowledge the entire eDNA task team, the Subcommittee on Ocean Science and Technology, the Biodiversity Interagency Working Group, and in particular, my co-chairs Chris Meyer from the Smithsonian and Mike Weiss from the Office of Naval Research. I'm guessing you guys are familiar, but don't want to make any assumptions. eDNA is DNA from organisms found in the environment. It offers a microbes to mammals approach to address demand for large-scale biodiversity monitoring. There's a lot of benefits. mainly being that it's really easy to collect. And basically, it's a forensics type of approach. It is an extension of the techniques that we use for bacteria and phytoplankton, extended in a forensic sort of way to higher organisms, including fish and marine mammals. And we can, through this technique of having water sampled, we can, in addition to reach different sorts of places, including below ice or the deep ocean, this ability to sample water autonomously just opens up a whole world of monitoring opportunities and helps us combat the ever-increasing costs of ship time, which is quite expensive, especially for NOAA on white ships. So with that in mind, the National Aquatic eDNA Strategy was released this last June. And I have listed here the vision, which is to harness the power of eDNA to explore, map, monitor, and better understand aquatic life to sustain and restore our biological resources into the future. And I do want to point out that although we originally tackled this as a marine strategy, there was such demand to be inclusive that we did expand it to aquatic, and actually there was even more demand to be more inclusive, but it becomes a difficult task to expand to all air and land and everything, but there is still a lot of demand everywhere on this topic. So for the writing of the strategy, there was quite a bit of engagement. So in the writing team, there are about 20 people across 10 agencies, but the engagement reached over 100 federal subject matter experts and agency leaders from 24 agencies. And that generated just the internal federal, nearly 50 pages of track comments. And in addition, we had an RFI, public request for information, and that generated about 500 lines of comments that we carefully tracked and considered in constructing the strategy and the implementation plan. And out of the RFI, we had 27 submissions, but they were mostly group submissions. So out of those 27, we had all of these different interested parties, academic, commercial, business groups, quite a few business groups, philanthropic, public, nonprofit, etc., and even some responses from Canada. And so we adjudicated nearly 500 lines on the RFI. So hopefully you've taken a look for yourself about the strategy. Definitely encourage you to do so. But to make it easy, I'll just really quickly walk you through the highlights of it. The strategy was made to be very brief. You should be able to read it in 20 minutes. We had a virtual word jar. Every time someone added a word, they were supposed to pay a penalty to make sure that this could be very accessible to people just sitting down, giving it a quick read. And it's got 3 goals. The first focuses on coordination. And then the first objective under that coordination is alignment. And this is across agencies with activities that include having a coordination mechanism to identify priorities and facilitate harmonization of common guidelines and policies, to align our efforts with international and multinational organizations, and co-design the implementation plan and specific implementation plans. That second objective is harmonization. That's just through promoting standards and best practices and continual improvement of the entire eDNA workflow, from sampling design, assay development, lab protocols, and verification of results. You name it, it's all into this harmonization part. And the third is communication, which to me is one of the most critical and probably difficult pieces. And this is really getting to having clear, consistent, and inclusive communication across agencies, sectors, and importantly, with non-technical audiences to enhance the ability to interpret and utilize eDNA data. The idea is that common messaging will enhance awareness for what is fit for purpose for eDNA applications. It'll help mature our use cases and our emerging emerging capabilities, and also to let people understand what applications are not suited for eDNA tools. So, oh, I did all of these. I forgot. You guys were getting the long version. So now I'm going to skip through these. So here's an example of a communication strategy that the USGS is using. And we understand that these are critical for adoption. This is a USGS comprehensive communication plan in which they sort of map out working with local, state, and regional stakeholders and decision makers. I think you guys more than any group understand, you know, you can have a flow chart like this, but it really is quite a lot of work and effort and commitment to having good communication. And it takes more than scientists to do this correctly. And I think we understand that as well. So the focus of goal 2 is to build human capacity, the technical infrastructure and research enterprise needed to employ eDNA applications at all scales. And so objective 2.1 is about developing people power. This is our next generation of experts, stewards, and champions, educators, and enthusiasts. And I'm going to, you can read these slides. I want to give a lot of opportunity to hear back from you guys. So I'm going to not read the slides for you. The second objective is about creating the underpinning infrastructure. So this involves field, laboratory, and importantly, informatics, bioinformatics infrastructure, all aspects of the workflow. And we understand that we need better, faster, scalable sampling devices that can be deployed in all habitats. And we understand there's always an opportunity to improve sampling and the workflows. And so we understand that we need to stay nimble as technologies grow. And then, and particularly, so the R&D part, you know, has to continually, iteratively move into this process, and there is quite a lot of basic research that still needs to be done, and yet there are also pieces that are ready to be deployed now. So the third goal is very ambitious. It's basically to use eDNA to make comprehensive assessments of aquatic life in U.S. waters. Just a small objective. And this basically sets the goal of creating a functioning observation network. We understand that we can't be everywhere all at once. So at first we will need to prioritize. And so this, you know, sets up the structure on how do we do that as a group and co-develop that. And, you know, obviously this is where a group like you comes in. So we're going to have to build on things that are already existing. We have to leverage existing capabilities and move forward from there. And then next we need to, you know, create that network once we sort of prioritize, and this calls for creating opportunities for public-private partnerships, including autonomous platform development, engage industry innovation, and provide scaling incentives and price certainty to assure markets. So in other words, we understand that, you know, federal and state governments, you know, play a role in making market opportunities clearer, and we need to figure out how to do that. And then last is making sure that the data we generate is utilized for societal benefit, that we are being able to use these data streams to, you know, support decision-making and promoting equity and environmental justice. And all of this involves really co-design, working with the interested parties. So overall, those outcomes are, you know, scaled activities, automated systems to provide sufficient coverage and knowledge to establish robust metrics to inform the status of aquatic health across the nation. And this is to meet our federal mission mandates, but also in the end is to preserve our resources, our biological resources. So the strategy is very high level. Like I said, we tried to use vignettes or boxes to talk about use cases and examples, and those boxes are evaluating management actions, autonomous eDNA sampling, NEPA compliance, commercial fisheries applications, Endangered Species Act consultations, and early detection of invasive species are all highlighted as sort of use cases. As we move forward into the discussion, as I said, we received quite a lot of very detailed input for RFI. Much of it was more appropriate for the implementation plan, which is being written right now. But I wanted to give you just some nuggets, what we heard, so you could see how that resonates with you. Of course, there was a lot of calls for support. You know, everybody wants more money. This is understandable. And so there was a call for providing initiatives and incentives to harmonize standards, to promote research, innovation, implementation, and partnerships. There were a lot of calls regarding specific, telling us the types of infrastructure that is needed, and this also included specific things about amplicon sequence variants. So we got a lot of technical information. And then also, seeking automated solutions and low-cost sampling solutions, and even information about telling us that we need better ways to filter, in dilute systems, but also in turbid conditions. So we really received quite a lot of information. A big part, a lot of people said, we need technical consensus to make these markets. We have to get somewhere where people are all on the same page, singing from the same hymn book, as you will. And that is, formalizing best practicals, formalizing protocols, and quality assurance. And also, like I said, technical literacy and ability to communicate readiness. What is ready for what application? What is not so ready? What is still in R&D? What is ready to be used for decision making? And lots of calls to be included, which I'm hoping coming here today will be part of making sure that groups are included in these conversations. So in summary, the National Aquatic eDNA Strategy, or the NAES, is based on the understanding that shared technical knowledge is critical to the production of reliable and credible data. And so this is setting forth a roadmap for us to have collaborative efforts that unite scientific inquiry, entrepreneurial enterprise, philanthropic endeavor, and public and private investment. And so with that, I want to thank you, and then open up for discussion. I'd like to hear your own thoughts about the role of organizations or groups like this, state, and particularly what perhaps you would like to see moving forward in the implementation plan, or how you would see your own roles now that the strategy is out, which it exists coming out of the White House. What would be next for your all's way to help implement, and then maybe what you imagine the implementation plan would be or should be. So I give it back to you guys. Yeah, I'm also open to for questions, obviously, but I'd really like to hear what you all have to say.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Anyone from the council or anyone in attendance that have some direct feedback to Kelly on this overall kind of framework and implementation strategy? I look to maybe Lindsay or Susie. Some of the other speakers are a great place to start. But I mean, I for one think that having a national framework like this helps the states kind of move forward with showing that where they have like a use case showing support from the federal government, saying that this is important on a national scale, which helps us as states make the case to do this kind of work, especially when we're in problematic budget years as a state. So like that makes it a little bit easier for us when we can show, look, this is a cross collaborative effort, not just within California or within the West Coast, but this is a national level scale. I think that really helps us speaking as a employee of the state agency do our job or make a pitch to our legislature or whomever to prioritize this work moving forward. So I really appreciate this kind of national level work. Pike.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And thanks, Kelly, for that great presentation. I remember talking with you at the SCORP workshop back, I think in November. I can't, and apologies, I can't remember if you spoke to this in your presentation or in the national strategy, but something that we're thinking about is not only the actual physical sampling and processing of samples for aquatic DNA, but also the comparison to reference libraries. And I wonder what the engagement with folks at, PMEL, for example, or the USES or Cow Coffee and Scripps to build out those libraries. Because it's all well and good to have the sample, but if you don't know what you're looking at, or if you're getting false positives or false negatives, the waters can still be muddy.
I love an educated audience. That's so awesome. Yes, indeed. And in fact, that message has really been well heard at the national level. I don't know what I'm allowed to share or not share, but I know people, non-feds know about this, that there is some draft language circulating for a possible bill that focuses on reference libraries, and that would be fantastic. And then there is another possible bill, language circulating for another possible bill about eDNA, and reference libraries are specifically mentioned there. In addition, when the strategy was rolled out, the Smithsonian stepped up and made a commitment to genome skim every US fish in their collection in the next 2 years. So they really stepped up. Now, as we know, that still leaves a lot of organisms that, particularly all of our invertebrates and, everything else, still has huge dark taxa, as we call them. And so we really understand, and it is one of the reasons the Smithsonian is one of the co-chairs. It is very central. Sequences in a vacuum are not very useful. So, but thinking about implementing the strategy, you can imagine those groups you just talked about at a local level being critical, right? A strategy and implementation plan are not boots on the ground. So having that community and that network is going to be key to implementing these ideas.
Susie, go ahead.
Hi, I'm happy to chime in, and I have some time later, so I'm going to try and keep it short. But Kelly, I think it's always so great to hear about all the hard work that went into the implementation plan. I think it just tees up just so much coverage of eDNA methods, and it helps really get everybody kind of excited. And it's just been really great for exposure and awareness about eDNA methods in general. And the word that I feel like I honed in on when you were speaking is leverage. And I feel like for this group, that's really where we bring so much in California, is just all of these regional monitoring programs that are investing so much time and energy into collecting samples. And so layering on eDNA sampling or method comparisons, there's just such an wealth effort already being put into those monitoring. And so if we can begin layering eDNA across all those different monitoring programs, I think it could just scale tremendously. And I think California just presents a really great opportunity for that. So I would underscore that word in your presentation.
One of the things I'd like to hear, if I could, so in the pending implementation plan, there's a lot of stuff about the standardization. A lot of people speak to that part. To me, goal 3 is the really hard part, right? Which is actually doing it. But people tend to hone in on the part that seems, I think, a little bit more tractable is, oh yeah, we should have standards, or we should have guidelines, we should have best practices, yada, yada, yada. Great. And then we write it in there, and then I show people that language, and they're like, oh, we don't want to do that, right? Oh, wait, no, don't tie our hands. And it's like, well, but you were the ones who said that needed this to be done. and so one of the things that I am curious about is in the state, right? Data, your protocols and procedures, your standards, your quality assurance is stricter when data is literally being used in decision making. And then things that are R&D, are a little bit, at the lab level and a little bit looser. And yet people always say, oh yeah, I want to be funded for this project because I want my data to be used for decision making. I'm curious what examples maybe already exist, and I'm thinking about the recreational water quality labs that are being used to, using qPCR right now to, close beaches. What is the process at the state level? Did they have to adopt a new set of protocols? We'll say, yes, this data is special because it is being used to make a decision. Or, and how could we use that experience to inform what we should say in the implementation plan? Or what would you find useful in the implementation plan to distinguish these different criteria, the stricter criteria for data that is literally feeding into a decision?
Steve, I see your hand is up, and then also Steve, then Greg, and then I also saw Peter had his hand up previously.
So Kelly, I think you nailed one of the things that would be a great relationship between the federal efforts and the state efforts. You are correct. In California, if you want to use data for, I should not say all, but most types of decision making, certainly regulatory decision making, you have to have a standard operating procedure that's very repeatable, and you have to have a laboratory accreditation program to show that the people who are implementing the agreed upon standard operating procedure are capable of doing it correctly. And I think we have one of the better laboratory accreditation programs, one of the few that really is proactive and willing to take on new kinds of methodologies like this. For instance, you heard earlier today, if you were on at the beginning when we were hearing updates, Christine Sotelo, who is the head of the laboratory accreditation program as a member of the council, talked about how we have now moved forward and accredited the first laboratories for microplastics. And it's basically set a stage. That's the kind of thing that's very hard for you to do at the federal level, but we have a process for doing it at the local level. And if this stuff is ever going to really get to the point where I think we all want it to get, that it's not just a research tool, but essentially an application tool, we're going to have to walk down that road. And I'll let Christine talk for herself, but knowing her, I'm sure she'd be enthusiastic to work with you. Maybe that's your cue, Christine, to come off of mute, jump the line, and
yeah. Thank you so much, Steve. Yeah, and I agree with Steve. I think that there is a fine line, but the state board has, I think, a criteria or a level of different types of data that they designate as regulatory, research. And Greg, I'm looking at Greg because I remember reading about this. So not all laboratory data is required to be accredited, but once it's used in a permit, policy, or order, I believe it's something that the state board has a process to accredit, because now it's in this area or space where they have to make a decision. If it's in the research sort of area, they want to have defensible, reliable information so that they can move forward into the regulatory space. And once it hits that area, then it's required to be accredited. That's also stated in our California Water Code and in different statutes within the different programs within the state. So I don't know if Greg wants to talk more about his thoughts about data and the levels of information from laboratories that they use, but that's your cue, Greg.
Me, Greg, or is there another Greg on there?
Greg Gearhart.
There's another
got it.
Greg, but I don't want to jump the Greg in the line jumping because Gregs have to look out for each other. So Greg
Go
Schumer,
ahead.
why don't you go? Okay.
No, go ahead. This is a good conversation. I don't want to sidetrack.
All right. The state of California and the water boards don't really have a clear path for data falling into different categories for different uses. We have ideals that we talk about all the time, but honestly, we use a lot of data for decision making that doesn't have any QA in mind, has no quality management planning process around it. We have other data that has very robust quality management plan process and systems around it that isn't used in decision making. And so we live in between those ends of the spectrum all the time, but we try to aim towards a process. And I do think, with water quality and laboratory data, the accreditation step applies to the laboratory. It doesn't necessarily translate to putting like a gold stamp on data that comes out. And so, we have a lot of work to do still. I think eDNA is a great example of, it takes a little bit of inertia to improve the systems that want to consume and use data in decision making. You have to push into it. You can't just sort of wait till someone to sort of specify the standards. And so we have a lot of examples like that where emerging technologies. What's a good example? Water conservation during the drought order that came out like 4 or 5 years ago, the original one, not the current regulations, but the original one. We didn't collect data on how much water was being used and conserved around the state of California. We had instant authority to do that. There was not a lot of like QA put into it other than calling up people to check and make sure that the numbers they submitted, but that was in the news, being used to shame cities and sometimes celebrities around the state of California on a regular basis. So that was a good example of an instant system that jumped into place because we needed it, but we didn't necessarily have all the data quality alignment. So I think eDNA. I'm happy to have conversations more with you. I'm sure you're already talking to teams in OWEMA. We have an amazing group that has worked on eDNA in California. But I'm happy to try to help with some of the data ecosystem context too. I would not see it as a barrier to not have sort of a regulatory standard for eDNA data. I would recommend that we push forward and try to use it and then try to evolve and go together.
Greg, the other Greg Schumer.
Yeah, I run a commercial lab, so I'm coming from the other side of this. I run the genetics lab at Kramer Fish Sciences, and what I've experienced when eDNA has been used to make or integrated into a structured decision-making process with the agencies or any regulatory agencies, that we have always gone into consultation with the regulatory agency and discussed which procedures are acceptable and how they would be applied in specific situations to incorporate the correct language in a ITP, an incidental take permit, or any other sort of take permit. And it's usually around the definition of take. So that's how we've tackled it. We've always gone into consultation and had the agency tell us what they need to be able to use the eDNA data to make an actual decision and how that would be applied in a specific situation. So that's always been really hard because everybody knows it's a viable technology, but how do you use it? And getting the agencies to say how it could be used is very difficult because it's just at that point right now where I don't think anybody really wants to come out and just say it explicitly how they would use it, or maybe they don't know how to use it or how it would be incorporated, and that's equally as difficult. So having these conversations over permits, and for us, every time we've gone into consultation, the context has been construction monitoring, where there are fixed deadlines and a lot of money going into, say, building a flood wall in the Napa River And it has to happen within this time scale, and you cannot get a permit to net something because it's an endangered species. So you have to use an alternative it has a zero impact technology to monitor the presence of something that's stated in the permit. So it's a catch-22. That's when we've found that eDNA has come in handy and has been approved and incorporated in the language of any sort of take permit. But having that conversation and having the agency say explicitly, like, we need this information and we need you to give us a written protocol, and it needs to be conducted exactly like this. And yes, we approve that, and then you can build from there.
If you have any written examples where you'd said, examples of approved and incorporated, please email them to me. And that's why I put my email on the first slide where, we're really looking at those sort of examples set precedent. So like I said, communication is huge. I mean, we even within an agency like NOAA, we've got people that don't know about different things, right? Not everyone, we're big agencies among a lot of other big agencies. And this is why that communication, being able to point to things, people love it when someone has already done something and then they go, oh, okay, I'm not out here on a limb saying that this data can be used. So it's very useful if you guys when you have examples like that, it can be really powerful to creating more examples like that and easing the way for people to start to feel comfortable. There is obviously a lot of discomfort in forensic evidence for agencies that are used to actually having a fish. I think, so for the EPA, it's a little bit easier when you're dealing with microbes because people don't expect to see microbes. So the fact that you're doing it molecular versus, it's not so far away. But I think a lot of times when we're talking about invasive species and fish, this is a really different sort of concept for people to think about, an invisible fishing net, if you will. So thank you very much for that.
Evelyn.
So I'm not a scientist, but I really appreciate this conversation. And what I always think about is like the canary in the coal mine, and like how, like with eDNA, I know that it did a lot of, it supported COVID, right? And how it affected public health. I mean, we're always trying to tug at like the emotional, engagement of people, like whether it be legislators or the public. And so I would just always encourage like public health being like kind of, even though of course biological health we're all connected, but somehow public health seems to like get people riled up. So that would be my suggestion, like as far as how it relates directly to public health. So thank you.
Thanks, Evelyn. Christine?
So I just wanted to mention to Kelly that there is, if I recall, there's a report from the National Academy of Sciences. They were reviewing USGS's laboratories. I think they have dozens of laboratories throughout the United States, and they had some problems in their laboratories. And there may have been some inappropriate practices, but the report's really good, and I can find it and send it to this committee. But the advice of the Academy of Sciences to USGS was to decide what level the data was used for. So if it was for, like someone mentioned earlier, Greg, for billions of dollars of projects for, international impacts, then they wanted that data to be accredited because it's more reliable, it's defensible, it goes through this process, which California eLab does with the methods that we offer. And then there were other different levels based on research. And so I'm only mentioning that because it's really the decision of the data user to decide how that data is going to be used. And I don't know if you guys caught earlier that I said it's strict in California under the water code and the health and safety code that if it's used in permit policies and orders, then it should be accredited by California eLab. So just more information for Kelly to look into.
And can I ask a clarification? I want to make sure I understand this, but from my reading, the word accreditation, and we did get a lot of RFI, the word accreditation came up a lot, but from my reading, accreditation is at a state level, you know, and that it is not a term, and we have so far have not used that term in the implementation plan because we're using things like quality assurance, you know, so QA, QC, proficiency testing, like those sorts of things, but we've not used the word accredited because my understanding that is not a federal term of.
That's right.
Okay, I just went, good. Okay, that's good.
Yeah, and I can just tell you, accreditation is a process that facilities or entities follows. There's like accreditation for colleges, for different schools. You see that on, you know, whatever college you went to, it's an accredited school. That means that they went through a process to validate the integrity of the school's process, a laboratory's processes that include quality assurance, quality control, that they're following the method. So what you're talking about is processes within our accreditation program to ensure that the laboratory is qualified, that they have competency, that the instrumentation works, that you can rely on it, and that it's defensible. So that's the difference.
And for the federal role, because keep in mind the implementation plan, right? That basically says this is what we are going to do or commit to do, and we can't say anything other than those commitments that we have direct purview over. Would you find it helpful if federal agencies did a biannual state of the science review and vetted through code development, but vetted particular protocols and said these have been vetted, tested, and here, you know, here is a set that you can go to and feel like you're just, you know, not starting from zero? Would you find that useful?
Is that question for me?
Oh, it's for anyone, you know, yes, for you, you know, for anyone who might.
I think I can answer it from like a standard setting perspective. You know, and you brought up recreational monitoring for, you know, fecal integrated bacteria and PCR and QMRA methods. So at the state, when we're writing a regulation, which, you know, would outline objectives and then specify the methods to then report on the data collection and then make a comparison to the objectives. We more often than not will look to EPA for the example. And for bacteria, that was the case when I helped push in the updated bacteria objectives based on the science from the 2012 EPA recommended criteria, which had, you know, the cultural based methods, and then they kind of they've had some updates where they've added on some of those molecular method processes. But the state, we still have just the cultural methods. So that's what we require for the accreditation is you must be accredited to perform these sort of culturally based testing or use the equal or what have you. But folks are, you know, at the regular community are using the PCR to explore, is this a cheaper option? Is this a more precise option that really targets the human sources of wastewater? But until the state updates its objectives to reflect those new methods of molecular methods, there'll be no impetus for Christine to start accreditation because we at that point we would ask her, say, hey, we're going to put this into our objectives and our regulations and permits. We need to have an accreditation process, then that would trigger her team to go out there to find labs that will be accredited. So it's kind of this weird gray area, but more often than not, I think that your implementation, and if EPA was doing the science review, the states would gladly look to leverage whatever work you're doing to provide us, and we'll beg, borrow, and steal whatever that information is, and then put it into our own frameworks. And that really helps us do our job because we're all resource strapped, but that really helps us move forward with setting our standards or updating our standards in this case.
It is very commensal. I think it's a very commensal relationship, that push-pull, right?
Yep.
If the states have no need and no demand, then federal agencies don't prioritize it. If if there is no state demand, then there's no no private demand. There's no environmental consulting companies going, "Ooh, I want to make a product of this." And so these things, I think, really pull together, and the art is getting everything to resonate at a frequency that makes a symphony. And that's, I think, where we're trying to get to.
Eric?
I just want to point out that there is at least one example in the state that involved accreditation of a molecular method, which was the ddPCR application to beach water monitoring in San Diego County. And so EPA there was the study that SQUIRP helped do to demonstrate an equivalence with the EPA method, the culture-based method, but it is now being used for that application for beach monitoring. And so that lab did get accredited to do that test, and that is being used for beach water monitoring and notification. And so that may be a helpful example to look to that has actually happened.
Thanks, Eric.
The other thing I'll say too is that just from the, if there's it is really state driven, but if there's a new method, even though people look to EPA for methods, but if it as far as the standard side goes, and there aren't really a lot of examples of this, but it is possible to have methods that are not EPA methods be used for standards. I mean, there's a whole process for approving water quality standards, and if it's information that is informing whether beneficial uses are met and there's science to back it up, it goes through the 303C approval process and can be used for water quality standards. So that's just to say that some of these new methods and tools, if there's an application that is filling a void that where there isn't information or methods available, the state can pursue those. One example might be what's happening around the California Stream Condition Index. That's not a molecular method, but that is being pursued as potential water quality standard for the state. And that's state specific, and it's not something that EPA has put out a method for. That came from within the state. So it can be done.
No, agreed. Thanks, Eric, for that clarification, man. My point was that's a long process compared to what would the EPA, if we can take, like I said, if the EPA is going to willing to take and meet and do the state of the science, we'd be happy for that to happen. Let me go to Christine, then Evelyn, then we'll move on, and we can hopefully pick this up at the end when we have a larger time for discussion. But I want to make sure we get to the other speakers. And I think we'll hear more about what Greg put in the chat from Lindsay and what we're doing within our surface water ambient monitoring program related to eDNA and where we see some potential for moving forward.
So I just wanted to dovetail off of what Eric said. So San Diego was accredited for ddQPCR. It was a request at the county that they wanted this alternative method. So they went through the process. It was approved by EPA. And so it is a state-specific request. So if we swing back to specifically eDNA, once it gets to a place where one of the state programs in California want to test eDNA and use it for decision-making, there's a process. You would come to us and make the request, and we would review the test method, make sure that it's standardized. And I know that that's some of the things that Susie's working on and you folks are working on at NOAA, that we can get consistency across laboratories and across California, so that when we go into the laboratory, we can make sure that this lab in Northern California and another lab in Southern California, or even another lab in another state, is going to have the same set of requirements, that we can make sure that they all follow the same procedures. So just wanted to say that that's how it would essentially work with eDNA, and that's how it worked with ddPCR for San Diego County.
Thanks, Christine. Evelyn, and then we'll move on.
I just wanted to make a point about like how endocrine disruptor data was first like correlated to frogs, and then now we know how it affects human health. So it's just an example of how your work could affect like drinking water standards. You know, thinking out of the box, because we can't do human subject testing mostly. And so it's so valuable to have this, you know, relationship, like biological relationship for drinking water. So, and I think you lead policy like decades before we really catch up on things. And I think that was a good example of that. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Share my screen again. All right, Susie. Talk a little bit more about what we've been doing at the Molecular Methods Workgroup and how that has overlapped and helped kind of feed into the national strategy.
Awesome. Are you going to share slides, Nick?
I can, yeah.
Okay, perfect. There we are. Great. Awesome. Okay, thanks so much for this opportunity. And thank you to Kelly. That was a perfect tee up for what I was hoping to talk about today. And so if I haven't met you previously, I'm Susie Thoreau. I head up our Molecular Methods Workgroup, and which we've had now almost, I think, 6 years. And it's been a really great opportunity to bring together a community of researchers who are interested in environmental DNA and what it brings to a lot of our biomonitoring and bioassessment programs. Next slide, please. So that was a really perfect overview from Kelly on the eDNA national strategy, which I would say represents so much of the great input and consensus around priorities for advancing eDNA methods at this national scale. And so bringing it to the California scale, what I wanted to highlight today was some of the efforts towards these same goals that we have here for our monitoring programs and the ways that we've already been addressing or working to address some of these key goals around coordination, method standardization, and identifying demonstration projects that really help promote what I like to call eDNA literacy and familiarity and trust and excitement around eDNA tools and what it can bring to our monitoring programs. We had a meeting just back in December where I kind of talked about some of the key efforts of the Molecular Methods Workgroup. So I'll spend just a little bit of time reviewing some of those things, but then I also want to highlight a lot of the great work that's being done through the West Coast Ocean Biomolecular Observing Network, or West Coast OBON, and then also the ways that eDNA adoption is being pursued through a number of our different regional monitoring programs. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So our Molecular Methods Workgroup was established in 2018 when we, I think, came together with this Water Quality Monitoring Council and acknowledged that these eDNA methods are like coming online, and we're interested in exploring how we can be incorporating them into our monitoring programs and what are the considerations that we need to have in terms of the best practices and quality control and quality assurance. We also identified that a lot of eDNA research happens in these silos. And so how can we be bringing people together to compare how they're doing methods and enhance this method adoption and comfort around how we're using the tools and interpreting the data. So in the past 6 years, we spent a fair bit of time developing some consensus-driven documents around best practices for eDNA sampling and also just best lab practices when you're handling eDNA-based data. And in the past couple of years, we've really been focused on this communication piece where we're doing a lot of informational webinars. I do a lot of outreach activities talking about how we're using eDNA and trying to bring the community together about recent publications. And we hear from a number of experts who get invited to our Molecular Methods Workgroup meetings. Again, just kind of increasing this eDNA literacy and familiarity with the latest and greatest in eDNA research. I'm really proud of the diversity of the membership of the Molecular Methods Workgroup. We have over 200 folks that are on our listserv. And they represent, a broad spectrum from academia to state and local government. We even have international participants, tribal communities. And so I think we really get a diverse representation of opinions and needs and experience levels. And so we have everybody from super eDNA novices to the expert user. And I think it just creates a really great community where people feel comfortable coming with their eDNA questions and hearing from the community at large about some of the best ways for adopting these tools. So it's open to everyone, and so I encourage everyone to come when they are available to our monthly meetings. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, one of our first goals was developing some of these best practice documents. They're really high level and they're meant to be adopted by various monitoring programs who can then tailor them to their needs. And so we've already seen that some of these early documents that we created through the Molecular Methods Workgroup have made their way into these larger regional monitoring programs like the Estuary MPA monitoring program, as well as the Bight Regional Monitoring Program, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So this was really, kind of a success story. We want to be providing resources that people feel comfortable knowing that it's been vetted by a group of trusted users, and so that they can take that and leverage it for incorporation into larger monitoring programs, hopefully making that kind of like initial adoption energy that's required like a little bit easier, because you know that you have a template that you can incorporate into your monitoring program design. Next slide, please. One of the other great ways that we've been reaching out into the broader community is in collaboration with the Water Quality Monitoring Council's Collaboration Network. And so over the past year, we had a seminar series where we talked about everything from like eDNA 101 to eDNA for bioassessment, harmful algal bloom monitoring, and targeted species surveillance. And we have a couple more on deck in the next couple of months as well that'll touch on human health and then sort of the data side of eDNA data generation. This again reached an even broader community. There were hundreds of folks who would attend these seminars as well that don't traditionally attend our Molecular Methods Workgroup meetings. And so I would credit the council with really kind of making these linkages between our work groups so that we could kind of broaden engagement. And again, emphasize that eDNA literacy component where we're just trying to get the word out and make people feel comfortable with the tools that are available and what their key strengths and limitations are. Next slide, please. And then I just like to underscore how it's nice to see our success in print. And so the Molecular Methods Workgroup has been recognized in publications as well. You can see this one that just came out this past year called Adoption of Environmental DNA in Public Agency Practice, where the Molecular Methods Workgroup was pointed to as kind of a great example of this idea of a sandbox, where you can have folks from diverse backgrounds that can come together, both managers and regulators and researchers, and discuss these tools as they're evolving and feel comfortable testing things out, going back to the drawing board, iterating, and kind of exploring all the diverse applications of a tool when it's kind of in development stages, and having that collaborative effort and that co-design element included makes this really fruitful discussion bring together these diverse communities. So I really like seeing that our Molecular Methods Workgroup getting that kind of recognition. Next slide, please. Okay, so zooming out a little bit, one of the other work groups that I'm involved in is called the West Coast Ocean Biomolecular Observing Network, or West Coast OBON. And the key leads of this group, we actually all met each other at the California Molecular Methods Work Group. So I feel like this is such a great example where that work group has helped encourage some novel collaborations. And now we head up this West Coast OBON group that is a group that's recognized by the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science. And so we have been together, I believe, almost 2 years now. And we have some key priorities that align with those of the Molecular Methods Workgroup, just now extending up and down the West Coast, all the way from Southern California up through Seattle and even into Maine or into Canada on the western side, where we have the Hakai Institute also participating. Okay, so this group is focused on aligning eDNA methods for marine biomonitoring programs, identifying bioinformatic workflows that could be incorporated into these different programs to hopefully harmonize a lot of the data that we're generating, and then also how we're reporting this data. And then we're also identifying ways that we can be bringing these environmental DNA data sets together to hopefully encourage bigger and better inferences of biological communities and how they're changing over space and time. Next slide, please. One of the key resources that the West Coast OBON has developed in the past couple of years is bringing together a number of the different DNA primer sets that we use for exploring different biological communities in our samples, everything from bacteria to fish to marine mammals. And you can find a resource on our website that kind of just lists all of these different available primer sets or protocols that we use for analyzing our samples, the different monitoring programs who have adopted them, and then you can link out directly to those resources so that you can adopt them yourselves. It kind of just presents this consensus of what a lot of folks are doing so that you know when you're making that selection for your monitoring program, who else you're in alignment with. And it's also just helped facilitate when we have a new program that's spinning up, they can look to that resource and say, okay, I'm going to follow the same template that's been laid out by a number of these other monitoring programs. And now I know that at least the way I'm inquiring, my water eDNA sample is going to be consistent with how they're exploring their biological communities as well. So this was one of the first things that we put together. And so you can find it on the website if you're curious to see kind of the diversity of protocols that folks are using across the West Coast. Next slide, please. One of the other big things that we've been working on over the past year, I think Pike had actually mentioned it previously in his comment as well, is this idea of thinking about DNA reference libraries and filling in DNA reference library gaps. And so one of the places that we started with West Coast OBON was in doing a big survey of a number of marine monitoring programs up and down the what we call the Northeast Pacific. And we ended up getting feedback from about 25 different marine monitoring programs, and they sent us their monitored species list. So we got that wish list of all the taxa that they're interested in surveying for as part of their marine monitoring programs. We compiled all of those lists, and we ended up with a taxa list of about 9,700 species that are monitoring up and down the Northeast Pacific. And so then what we've been working on is developing an automated pipeline that essentially does what we call a gap analysis, where it takes our species list, looks to see who's there, and then queries these big global DNA reference databases and says, okay, do I have a reference sequence available for this taxa of interest? We can then use this pipeline to identify and prioritize the taxa that lack these DNA reference sequences. And so it's a really powerful way for us to get a gut sense of, of everybody I might be interested in monitoring. Who can I feel confident has one of these reference sequences available in these public databases, and who are we going to prioritize for filling in those DNA reference library gaps? Next slide, please. Oh, you can hit one more. Thanks. Oh, go back. Thank you. One more. Go back. One more. There you go. Okay, perfect. So just as a quick overview of the preliminary results from this gap analysis for the Northeast Pacific species, as I mentioned, we had about 9,700 taxa that made it into that monitored species list, and about 50% of them have reference sequences in GenBank, in those big global repositories of DNA sequences. So this really gives us our marching orders. It lets us know, like, who are we going to prioritize for beginning to fill in those gaps. And so this was just highlighting again, like the power of the information that you can gather if you have a number of these monitoring groups coming together to build this kind of reference point so that we can all be identifying what taxa are really priorities moving down the road and filling in those DNA reference library gaps. One more slide, thank you. All right, and one of the last efforts of the West Coast OBON that I wanted to highlight is developing a DNA barcoding best practices document. This was the result of an effort back in May of this year when we came together at a conference in San Diego and had a full-day workshop to talk about how a number of different experts in going into the field and doing bioblitzes and collected voucher specimens and then identifying them and extracting them in the lab and then generating the DNA sequences and then depositing that data. We had folks from Scripps from the LA Museum of Natural History. I know that we had folks from OPC on the line. And a lot of folks from NOAA. And we all talked about the different ways that we've been doing this and identified what the main commonalities are to develop this consensus-driven document on best practices for everything from specimen collection to lab processing to bioinformatics and data reporting. We have a draft that's written now. It got sent out to a number of the presenters from this workshop. It'll get iterated on, reviewed through West Coast OBON, and then we'll hopefully have a public release available in winter of this year. And so I was really proud of this effort because there was a lot of energy. Folks were really engaged on identifying what some of these best practices were. And as someone who's been doing DNA, for over 20 years, I even learned things about when you're doing bioblitzes and how some of the best ways are to track your samples and then analyze that information and get that data reported in a well-curated way. And so be on the lookout for that. And I'm really excited for that document that we'll be putting out. Okay, next slide, please. One of the other elements I wanted to highlight, as I mentioned previously, was all the different ways that eDNA has been incorporated into regional monitoring programs, and how I think this really underscores, as Kelly was mentioning, this idea of leveraging a lot of the effort that's already out there, collecting critical biological information through these regional surveys, and how layering eDNA onto these surveys just gives us bigger and better inferences about these biological communities and how they're responding across space and time. So two that I wanted to highlight in particular include the NOAA Cal Coffee program of the California Cooperative of Oceanic Fisheries Investigations, and then also the Southern California Bight Regional Monitoring Program, which for the first time in 2024 and 2025, both of these programs will be collecting water eDNA samples in the same way. The NOAA Cal Coffee program has been doing this for a few years. Bight, we've had a few eDNA pilot programs. This time we're going full force forward, collecting these samples across all of our different dischargers who are graciously collecting water eDNA samples for us. And we've aligned how we're doing it with how NOAA Cal Coffee does it. And it also with the West Coast ocean acidification cruises are going to be doing it in 2025 as well. So I think this really, again, just underscores the strength of getting these monitoring programs talking to each other and looking to align and harmonize these methods. And now just like a success story where we actually are able to be collecting these eDNA samples across all these different programs and be having that greater spatial and temporal coverage that we like to see for these biological species observations. I think next one is my penultimate slide. Perfect. Thank you. That was such a great discussion about method standardization and when things like lab accreditation are necessary. And I think that's so helpful. And I hope to see more of that over the next couple of months and years. Internationally, it's like the same conversation that we're having among a bunch of international researchers as well. And in the past 2 years, we've had a group come together called the International eDNA Standardization Task Force, which I'm a member of, and we're involved in a number of different international standards organization standards development efforts, everything from eDNA sampling to DNA extraction to DNA metabarcode sequencing. And so just know that there's a lot of energy, I would say, internationally about developing some of these standard documents, but what they really represent is kind of like the template that then can be adopted by different programs and used for informing those QA and QC requirements, and hopefully serve as a springboard for things that we would like to see in California and how it can be useful for us in our monitoring programs for exactly as Greg was saying, using information for potentially research purposes or informing regulatory decision-making. So I think it's really great that there's a lot of this energy internationally, but I also want us to think a lot about how that should be adopted for our particular uses in California, and hopefully just accelerate some of this adoption and conversation around standardization and lab accreditation. I think that leveraging some of the regional monitoring program efforts would be an excellent place to test out some of these standard documents. So that's something I would love to see, is leveraging some of these ISO type documents that are being developed either in the US or through this international effort, and testing them out through our regional monitoring programs and seeing what sorts of comparability we have, performing those intercalibration exercises, hopefully refining these methods and getting that critical QA/QC documentation that we need for feeling confident in that data. Last slide, please. So with that, I would just highlight again, I think it's been really exciting to see all these eDNA methods be adopted across regional monitoring programs, a number of pilot studies. I think if we look back now, the past 5 to 10 years, it's scaled practically in order of magnitude, even just here in California. And so it's been really exciting time for developing novel ways of analyzing biological communities and expanding our capacity for doing so. I think we're seeing some really great success already through the efforts of the Molecular Methods Workgroup, through what we'll hear from Lindsay next, the CMAP program, and how we're aligning these eDNA methods across monitoring programs helps ensure comparability and quality of data for years to come. And these regional monitoring programs really being the perfect test bed for exploring these novel tools and refining them to fit our uses. I would like to again thank Kelly for her insights on the eDNA national strategy. And I would say that the key goal of the collaboration standardization and these demonstration projects really echoes all the priorities that we have here in California. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how it can help encourage even more participation in eDNA methods. And I think that's it. I'm happy to take any questions if there's time.
Yeah, we have a little bit of time. Anybody have questions for Susie? I know we get pretty often updates from her great work in the Molecular Methods Workgroup, but seeing this as an eDNA focused thing and just hearing about Kelly's processes, any information or questions that we have for Susie?
No question, Nick, but just a congratulations to the council. We had incredible foresight to get this group going and to do what, I mean, the whole reason we started this group was let's get this stuff unified before it becomes disorganized, rather than all the other things that we work on. We're trying to patch together things that have been put into place already. So I'm just so glad that we did that and see how well it's working.
It's a great point, and I use this as an example for a lot of the work that the council does. So I want to thank you and Susie and all that SWRP has done to help lead this group forward. And you're right, it's been a great success, and I look forward to see where it goes in the future. Okay. Pike, are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Thank you.
Great. I feel like I should probably update some of my slides given Susie's presentation and Kelly's, but anyways, here we go. So good morning, everybody. My name is Pike Spector, and I am the Ocean Protection Council's Biodiversity Program Manager. Next slide, please. In our role as a cabinet-level policy body, we at OPC form the connective tissue across multiple levels of governance. That is to improve coordination across state agencies, which includes, but is not limited to, working with marine managers across the state to leverage resources and better understand, protect, restore, and conserve coastal and marine biodiversity. The foundation for making evidence-based decisions across the state rests on the invaluable monitoring programs that support and inform adaptive management. As you can see, there are many tools in the toolbox, including many of the programs listed here, and this list is certainly not exhaustive. We at OPC have a vision to better unify these programs under a cohesive statewide coast and ocean monitoring program. While this is still at the beginning visionary stage, OPC has continued to invest in discrete ocean observation and monitoring programs, and we are thinking strategically about how to unify coast and ocean monitoring statewide. Next slide, please. One such example is the Marine Protected Area Network Monitoring Program, the bread and butter of our ecosystem-based statewide monitoring program to assess the health of California's marine ecosystems. This is California's most comprehensive in situ monitoring program for coast and ocean biodiversity. In collaboration with the Department of Fish and Wildlife and many academic and NGO partners, we have facilitated decades of data collection inside of MPAs and adjacent reference sites that directly inform the adaptive management of this unprecedented MPA network. This program spans California's coastline and provides an unparalleled perspective on network performance, as well as other key metrics. Long-term monitoring is currently funded through 2026, and we are now thinking about the next phases in the evolution of this program. Next slide, please. While we cannot emphasize the importance of the MPA network monitoring program enough and its potential to serve as the keystone for our statewide vision, we understand that monitoring is incredibly expensive, laborious, and highly dependent on a cooperative ocean. With limited resources, we have been able to keep the lights on, so to speak, but we are looking beyond the current horizon so that we can better prepare for changing conditions. The questions that keep us up at night at OPC are, is monitoring comprehensive? Are data comparable? Does it capture rapid change? Is it adaptable? And is it scalable? Next slide, please. MPA monitoring isn't going anywhere. We need continued monitoring programs to inform adaptive management and to protect coastal biodiversity. But if our programs are rooted in understanding past conditions, are we preparing ourselves and our coast for climate change? And if not, what else are we missing? We need to be as informed as possible to make evidence-based decisions with that benefit our coastal ecosystems and the human economies that rely on them. We have emerging programmatic areas that would substantially benefit from adaptive, deployable, comprehensive monitoring programs. This includes, but is not limited to, 30 by 30 site selection and criteria, the development of offshore wind, observing impacts of ocean acidification and hypoxia, and future ASBS nominations. Next slide, please. It has become apparent in recent years that novel tools are coming online to help us answer questions and fill gaps as appropriate. eDNA is one such tool that may help us do a better job of understanding the state of and changes to California's coastal and marine ecosystems, and ultimately track and inform the state's efforts to protect, conserve, and restore coastal biodiversity. As you have heard from Kelly and Susie, and probably others before today's meeting, the development of eDNA techniques for long-term monitoring may help us gain a more comprehensive understanding of changes in species diversity and distribution, and help us quantify the presence or absence of rare and cryptic taxa. It may even help with early warning and detection of species invasions and range shifts. However, even though this tool has been developed for quite some time, it cannot replace human observers and data collectors in the field. And of course, there are drawbacks to deploying eDNA, especially before infrastructure can be put into place. Next slide, please. To help at least with the build-out infrastructure, and as part of the Budget Act of 2023, OPC was directed by the state legislature to develop the first ever intertidal biodiversity DNA barcode library, or intertidal library for short. We have identified Coastal Quest as the grantee, and the work should begin shortly. This ambitious project will target all of California's intertidal zones, from sandy beaches to rocky shores, and develop a database or library of DNA barcodes to aid in the rapid identification of species found on our coast. The ultimate goal of the intertidal library is to serve as a durable reference to understand and preserve biodiversity, but it will also facilitate novel data products such as species distribution models and pave the way for potential early warning systems for changes in patterns of biodiversity, as well as the potential to detect range shifts and species invasions. There will likely be opportunities to test the efficacy of experimental eDNA techniques alongside the development of the library. Please stay tuned for exciting updates as this project begins and continues through the first half of 2027. Next slide, please. As you can see, OPC is taking a long view approach to monitoring, studying, understanding, and facilitating the adaptive management of California's coast and ocean. We are excited by the prospects of integrating eDNA sampling protocols into existing long-term monitoring programs and look to potentially test eDNA efficacy alongside existing programs such as that MPA network monitoring and the intertidal library. We appreciate that eDNA has its limitations and drawbacks. Nonetheless, we are interested in its potential benefits. This will require close collaboration and partnership building and may lead to expert workshops in the near future. And if anyone has any thoughts on that, please let me know. Next slide. It's just a thank you. I realized that was pretty brief and really topical, but I figured this would be a really good forum to think about how we could integrate eDNA based on what we heard from Kelly and Susie into our vision for that statewide coast and ocean monitoring program. I really like Kelly's framing around the forensic approach of eDNA. Some of the drawbacks that I've heard are, you might get some cryptic taxa, like a blue whale swimming by your MPA, but you don't really get an idea of time except for how long it takes for that DNA to break down. So, for something a little bit more, like an example closer to home would be giant sea bass. What benefit are MPAs serving for giant sea bass? We have anecdotal evidence from specific MPAs, but we're concerned about network performance and the ability of the MPAs to act as a network. So are they important for that relatively rare, but not really cryptic species? Just one example. So I'd love to hear from anybody who has any thoughts.
Thanks so much, Pike, for taking the time today. Any feedback or any response to the questions posed by Pike?
And obviously feel free to shoot me an email if you don't want to raise your voice now.
Or any thoughts from Kelly? I mean, I'm assuming Kelly had seen some of your work previously, but just thoughts about, I know that some of the key points that she brought up was the lack of the DNA barcoding, but obviously you're investing a lot of time and effort and money into building up that for our coastline. I'm not sure if the federal government had a role in helping to fund that effort, or some of that kind of information would be interesting to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that we want to make sure we're not putting the cart before the horse, which is why I asked that question after Kelly's presentation. I've met with folks, for example, at UC Santa Barbara, who tell me that they have a bunch of bottle samples preserved, but it's pointless for them to run those samples until they have a reference library to compare it to. So when we build out the intertidal library, for example, for that specific project, at the end of the day, we're going to have all of these awesome data products that I mentioned, but really the backbone is having a reference library to compare those samples to. So something that we're thinking about is how to build out that library. Do we need to go into the field and get voucher specimens? I would rather see us leverage museum curated collections. Cal Academy has already expressed interest, and the LA Museum of Natural History. But after Susie reminded me of that awesome workshop back in San Diego that I was listening in on, I think there's a lot of opportunities to expand that partnership.
Great. Ray, I see your hand up.
Sure. I just want to mention that, I'm tied in with a large group, large coalition of groups that are doing MPA monitoring and do a lot of water monitoring in general. So, really glad to hear this, and, looking forward to hearing more and how we may be able to participate.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Ray.
Any other feedback or questions for Pike and with the great work that OPC is leading on?
I have a question. How is OPC funded?
That was sort of my question. Yeah.
I can answer that. Stepping in from a range of sources, primarily through the California State Legislature. So it comes from certainly special funds, proposition bond funds, as well as general fund monies. This specific project was directed by the state legislature as a direct budget line item to OPC, specifically with a budget allocation for this exact purpose of explicitly the intertidal biodiversity DNA library. And so that's where Pike is taking the lead in, again, identifying our primary partner. Coastal Quest is then working with, quite frankly, a network, a range of partners across the state to develop this project. And this was a directive from the legislature.
Thanks, Caitlin.
California. Spearheading. Good job.
Yeah. Yep. All right, with that, thanks, Kelly. I'll turn it over to Lindsay Metz, who is with our surface water ambient monitoring program with the Office of Information Management Analysis, to talk about the work that she's been leading around eDNA. I'll stop sharing. I gotta unmute Lindsay.
Hello. Do I have permission to share, Nick? Like I should be able to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Just pull up my slides here. Okay, so thank you, everyone.
Just might want to put it, there you go. Perfect.
Are we good?
Yep.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Nick, for inviting me to talk at this meeting and to share on what the Water Boards has been doing in the space of eDNA from more of the inland waterways perspective. So I'm mainly going to be focusing today on Water Board specific projects, but there are other state agencies that are currently doing work in the inland waterway space. So that's something that I will mention as well, but I'm going to go ahead and get into things. So just to briefly introduce myself, because I know that I'm probably a new face to a lot of the folks here in the room. My name is Lindsay Metz, and I'm an environmental scientist with the Swamp IQ unit in the Office of Information Management and Analysis at the State Water Board. And I have a few different hats that I wear, but my roles mainly revolve around managing all of our microbiology data that's generated through various monitoring efforts that we have at the state and regional boards. And that includes any PCR and metabarcoding related data and monitoring. And I also act as the CMAP coordinator, which is our Swamp eDNA metabarcoding monitoring and analysis project. And so effectively at the state board, I manage all of the eDNA and molecular related monitoring and work that's currently being conducted, or I'm assisting in a lot of that work. So just to go through, there's quite a broad list of current applications of eDNA at the water boards. We are within our CMAP project, we are using it for the analysis of aquatic communities and looking into the concept of aquatic biodiversity using eDNA molecular tools. We have several regional boards that are using eDNA for molecular source tracking, microbial source tracking, as a supplement alongside of the fecal indicator bacteria work that's done. We have our Region 9 office has been using PCR technology for endangered and rare species monitoring, as well as invasive species monitoring. We also have our freshwater harmful algal bloom program, which is a statewide program that's been using this as a preliminary test for cyanotoxins. And then we have our bioassessment program, which has been using eDNA to develop a algal bioassessment index. So to go into the SWAMP eDNA Metabarcoding Monitoring and Analysis project, which is the project that I manage. So this project was created back in 2020 initially as a concept within our office, and it was conceptualized as a community science-based metabarcoding monitoring project. And so we work with partners across the state to collect eDNA samples in aquatic environments all throughout the state of California. And those partners include various different community groups, including community organizations and nonprofits, other state agencies, and also several tribal governments that work with us. And we leverage this project to conduct field studies to support the creation of statewide guidance. We've been talking a lot about guidance and best practice documents. So that's something that we've been really focusing on the last few years, is generating information that can be used towards creating statewide guidance at the water boards level, state water boards level. So the project currently has 4 main goals that we're trying to work towards and accomplish. So one of those, and this was sort of the premise under which the project was initially created, which is exploring the use of eDNA in bioassessment at the water boards. So a lot of this energy was first created when we were investigating the use of algal metabarcoding for our algal bioassessment. And so there were questions around how we could potentially also use metabarcoding for benthic macroinvertebrate bioassessment, and just generating data to help support both of those questions and investigate both of those possibilities. And our second goal, like within the last couple of years, we've added in a few more goals to that, to this project. And so our second main goal is to make biological data available and accessible. And so that's really part of our process where we're working with these partners. And so it's a community-led project. So we disseminate eDNA collection kits to all of our partners, and then they get to design studies related to questions that they have about the watersheds that they're working within. So we're not necessarily directing their scientific or exploratory efforts, but we are providing them with the tools and the means to be able to use eDNA technology to ask questions about the biological environments that they're working within. We've also been, again, working towards developing statewide guidance for eDNA monitoring projects. The SWAMP program creates a lot of SWAMP level statewide guidance, SWAMP SOP guidance, and there's been a call for creating that similar level of guidance for eDNA monitoring. And then our last goal is to understand the significance of biodiversity data from the standpoint of how we can leverage eDNA monitoring in order to monitor and manage biodiversity more effectively. And so just to quickly highlight our partners, if it weren't for these folks, we wouldn't be a project. They help us to really broaden our sampling effort in a way that would not be possible otherwise. And working with these folks is what has allowed us to collect as much data as we have from all of the different regions within our state. And so just highlighting here all of the tribal governments that we work with, as well as several of the regional water boards work with us, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Morro Bay National Estuary Program, and then a few other, the Sierra Streams Institute, and then we also have a community organization down in San Diego of fly fishermen that work with us. And so there's really a broad spectrum of partners that we are working with. And I'm very privileged to be able to work with these folks and to really incorporate their input in terms of what their needs are related to biological monitoring and eDNA into the design of our project and the effort that we've been undertaking here. So what we've been using so far in order to do our monitoring are kits from the company Jonah Ventures. So Jonah Ventures is a company based out of Colorado. They make these really useful eDNA collection kits that are very simple. And the cost of the analysis is included with the price of the kit. So that's sort of how we were able to initiate this effort, was that we didn't have to create a laboratory contract, and we could just purchase these kits, and then we could get the laboratory analysis in addition to the actual sampling supplies. And so we order these kits, and then we disseminate them to our partners for them to use for their various own studies. And so this has been the sort of model that we've been using so far, but something that we want to start investigating is using different types of sampling techniques outside of just the sort of the simplest hand filtration method with the syringe. But this has been the easiest way to work with our partners because it's a cheap and easy method to get the actual sampling materials to them, and they're very intuitive to use and easy to sample with. So just to briefly outline what our project has been able to achieve so far. So sampling began, there was preliminary pilot sampling that was conducted in 2022, and it's been ongoing since then. We added, initially we were just looking at fish and phytoplankton DNA, but we've added in benthic macroinvertebrate DNA since 2022. And after the, oops, sorry, that's a typo. It was meant to say after the 2023 sampling season, we had collected 496 total samples at 237 different sites around the state of California. And then as of this sampling season, so the 2024 season, we disseminated another 300 kits to our partners. And so we will be, that will be additional data that will be added to what we've already been able to generate so far. And this has spanned across all 9 regional water board areas. So we're really getting a great spread of data across the entire state of California in the inland aquatic space. So one of the efforts that I undertook when I took over this position was to start using some of the kits that we are purchasing with as a part of this project to conduct studies aimed at understanding eDNA in the freshwater aquatic space and how we can start to generate better information towards guidance of producing these standard guidance documents and these field SOPs, and understanding various different collection methods, how we can compare this to the bioassessment work that our SWAMP program has already been conducting. And so last year in 2023, we performed a few different studies comparing different sampling techniques within streams, as well as comparing benthic algal samples to surface water algal samples to see how comparable eDNA samples are to the work that we've been doing with our bioassessment program, as well as comparing our traditional benthic macroinvertebrate surveys to molecular samples that we've been generating. And this year in 2024, we started to initiate some spatial and temporal studies to understand eDNA within the environment more effectively to generate better guidance around sort of study design when it comes to spatial planning, as well as the frequency you would want to be monitoring certain locations. So we've been doing small scale spatial studies. One of the things we've identified is that eDNA is a very easy sample to tack on to the bioassessment work we've already been doing. Since the bioassessment crews are going out to various different streams statewide, they can very easily just collect water samples alongside of the work they're already doing. So getting better information about how, if you wanted to add eDNA as sort of a additional data point to collect alongside bioassessment data, how to do that most effectively, as well as a long-term across a single season spatial study looking at variability in DNA within the system across days, weeks, and months. And then we've also continued the work of comparing our traditional benthic macroinvertebrate data to the molecular data we've been generating. So one of the products that has come out of this project as well is an online interactive indicator panel. So this is something that I manage myself, and it's a data portal online that anybody can access. I've got the link here. I believe that these slides will be sent out, so if anybody wants to check this out later, they can. And this goes through all of the data that we've collected and shows the various different fish phytoplankton and benthic macroinvertebrate groups that we've identified as part of this project. And you can look at samples collected in different spatial areas or by different, different partners, and just explore the data that we've been collecting. And this is something that I want to continue to work towards updating. We've been exploring different options of how we can create a more accessible data tool for exploring eDNA data. And so that's something that might change in the future as well, or at least hopefully be improved upon. So that's sort of where we're at so far in terms of the work that we've been doing, but there are some future directions we would like to explore scientifically, and those include exploring other taxonomic groups of interest. So I've been talking a lot with my partners about what groups they're specifically interested in. We started with phytoplankton and benthic macroinvertebrates being a primary of primary importance because of the linkage to our bioassessment program. And then we had included fish with that because initially the Joint Adventures kits came both with fish and phytoplankton. So that's sort of like how we decided on those three groups. But a lot of our partners are interested in some other taxonomic groups such as bacteria or amphibians or mammals. I've also heard reptiles thrown out there too. So we want to explore different models of conducting this project so that we can give folks more autonomy over what taxonomic groups they're actually looking for. We want to take a lot of the data. We've now generated a significant amount of data from around the state, and to really start to dive into that data and analyze any kinds of diversity related trends that we can pull from that data, especially considering a lot of the data is being collected at areas where we do other kinds of water quality monitoring. And as something else we've been interested in too is there's a lot of new modeling tools that have been put online, especially open source tools in R, different R packages that allow you to do things like multi-taxon analysis or spatial modeling within watersheds. So we'd really love to see how this data could be applied towards looking at some bigger scale modeling and asking some bigger questions that way. So these are things that we're hoping to explore in the near future. And then sort of getting outside of just the scope of what happens within CMAP, our community monitoring project, there are a lot of other goals that we have sort of generally within our SWAMP program towards eDNA. And those include, again, creating statewide guidance documents for eDNA. And sort of what that looks like underneath of my purview would be creating a field SOP guide for eDNA sample collection. And that would both include PCR as well as metabarcoding. Creating minimum quality objectives, which are quality objective documents that we create in order to inform field crews and labs on the types of quality assurance samples they should be collecting in order to meet the quality standards that we have for different data types within our program. And also guidance on data storage. So we have our California Data Exchange Network, CDN, which a lot of water quality data is fed into, and we would like for that to include both PCR and metabarcoding data. And then on the metabarcoding side, we would also love to sort of standardize the storage of raw sequence data associated with these types of projects in NCBI, and hopefully maybe eventually include GBIF in that as well, so that we can be contributing towards that global repository with the work we're doing here in California. I'm working towards creating some open source metabarcoding analysis data tools that I will be posting to the Water Board's GitHub page to help folks get started with bioinformatics and data analysis when it comes to eDNA data. I'm also working towards, this is sort of at the baby stages, just at the thought development stages, but really starting to think about how we can be more effectively monitoring and managing for biodiversity more generally. And also we've been working towards creating a consolidated molecular services contract at the water boards so that we can have a single contract that folks can use towards molecular-based monitoring projects. And hopefully that will increase the sort of accessibility towards being able to start those projects within our different regional boards and regional swamp programs, and that we can continue to increase our usage of eDNA with the applications that are applicable. So another thing that I've been working towards is just really the communication side of things when it comes to eDNA. So this year I have put together 2 different workshop series, one on just eDNA data that I've been presenting various topics to my CMAP folks and those who've been interested in following this project. So we've already had workshops on bioinformatics and biodiversity analysis. And then I'm also going to be giving presentations on emergent modeling techniques and data management and storage. And all of that's going to be, all of the materials from those things will be posted and freely available online for others to look at and review. And I've also been putting together a more agency-wide workshop series to try to target what the potential use cases for eDNA are on an agency level, and put together a planning document so that we have a better consensus going forward of how we want to use eDNA and sort of what the steps would be in order to accomplish that. And now to highlight some of the other efforts across the water boards related to eDNA. So we've got several regional boards that are currently regularly conducting microbial source tracking work. So that would include our Region 2, San Francisco Bay Area, Region 5, the Central Valley, and Region 9 in San Diego. Region 9 also does a lot of work with endangered and rare species monitoring, as well as invasive species surveillance. And then again, our FABS program, they work with a laboratory that's created a lot of primer sets for cyanotoxin, the actual toxin genes that they're then using as a pre-screening tool. They can, if there's the potential for a toxic bloom somewhere, they can go take a water sample, quickly get results if there were toxin genes detected, and then they can go back to collect samples for the more expensive ELISA process that we use for actually quantifying the toxin concentration in areas where there are blooms. And then we've got our bioassessment program. So we've had an algal index that we've been working with. It's the ASCII index as a part of our bioassessment program, which is based on traditional algal identification, morphologic identification using microscopy. But there's a lot of limitations with that in terms of the cost and the availability of algal taxonomists. And so we've been moving towards using a molecular method instead, and a molecular-based algal index, because that's a much more affordable and accessible method of doing this. And so that's work that's been spearheaded by Susie Thoreau down at SQUIRP. And they've been doing a lot of great work in developing that new molecular index. And hopefully that will be something that will be coming online here within the next couple of years. And I wanted to, starred the Region 5 and Region 9 points here, because I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on some of the specific examples of more of the PCR-based side of the eDNA work that we're doing that's being spearheaded by those regions. So Region 9 has been doing a lot of targeted species work. They've been using eDNA to look both for some of the endangered rare species down in the San Diego region, including the arroyo toad, the southwest pond turtle, steelhead salmon, and the California newt. And they've been working towards developing primer sets for all of these groups, as well as actually doing sampling to identify potential habitat for some of these species that can then be investigated further using more traditional methods. And they've also been using it for invasive species surveillance. So some of the more problematic invasive species down in that area are the American bullfrog and the red-eared slider. And so they've been able to use eDNA to identify where we are having problems with some of these problematic invasive species in that area. And so just to highlight a couple of the projects that have come out of Region 9 related to this. So they've been able to tack on eDNA sampling to the bioassessment work that they do as sort of just like an extra sample. And so they were able to go out in some of the areas where they've been conducting bioassessment and look using a probe specifically designed for the arroyo toad, look for potential arroyo toad habitat. And so this is a map showing where they sampled and the probability of arroyo toads being located in a particular area based on the samples that they produced as a part of the study. And so that's been a really cool way that they've been able to, that's sort of not necessarily within the purview of what they're monitoring and managing within Region 9, but it's something that they did in partnership with other agencies in order to just generate this data, since it's an easy additional sample to collect when they're going out to do the bioassessment work that they do anyway. So that was one successful project that they've been able to implement in this area. And then another project that's sort of up and coming is they've actually, so there's this river down in San Diego County that should be ideal habitat for steelhead, except that it's full of invasive species. And during certain times of the year when it's drier, this river kind of turns into all of these little isolated pools. But they have been able to, that are very hard to access because you have to hike like 8 miles through wilderness without really any great trail system to get to a lot of these pools. But they want to be monitoring them for the presence of steelhead. They've actually created a TMDL, which specifically is for the invasive species within this watershed. And they're trying to do some invasive species eradication here to promote steelhead habitat. And they're hoping to, the plan is to use eDNA to actually accomplish this, since it's such a difficult area to access for monitoring. And so this is actually a TMDL that is entirely based on eDNA related data. So that's a really cool project that they've got going on down there as well. And then just to quickly highlight, Region 5 a couple years ago did an MST study on the American River, which is a river that runs from the Sierras north of Sacramento and meets with the Sacramento River near downtown Sacramento. And for those of you who are less familiar with Sacramento, and there were a lot of issues with high E. coli numbers in the American River, and a lot of talk around the possibility that it was potentially the encampments of unhoused people that were located along the river that were causing these high E. coli numbers, and a lot of talk and concern around that. And so they decided to perform an MST study to investigate whether or not it was a human source of contamination for the E. coli, or if something else was contributing those high bacteria numbers, and to be able to use that as a means to move forward in terms of any kind of mitigation that needed to be performed. So they identified potential sources of pollution to the river, which could have been stormwater systems or sanitary sewer overflows, broken or leaking sewer lines or septic tanks, or park restrooms. It could be direct human inputs, which would be related to potentially the encampments of unhoused people that are located along the river, or it could have been due to domestic animals or waterfowl. And so they designed a study that was a 2-phase study where they collected both E. coli samples, traditional E. coli samples along various locations along the river, as well as MST samples. And in the instance that any E. coli samples had an MPN of 100 MPM per 100 milliliters of water, that would trigger then the analysis of those MST samples to identify what the source of the E. coli actually was. And so through this study, they were able to show that there was actually very little human contribution to the E. coli that was being detected in the river. In the first phase of the study, there was no quantifiable human E. coli, and it was primarily avian. And then in the second phase of the study, there was a very small amount of quantifiable human E. coli, and the majority was contributed by either avian or dog sources. They did the most prevalent source of human E. coli was in the urban runoff, which was not strongly detected in signals from the actual river itself. And so this just shows a little bit of a further breakdown of what those at those individual sites what they were seeing. And so you can see that in very few instances at the actual sites they were sampling, did they identify any human E. coli in the system. It was predominantly avian and dog. The one exception being one of the sumps that they sampled had a little bit more human E. coli contamination. So that was a really enlightening study that showed that the high E. coli numbers were not due to human fecal contamination, meaning that the process for performing any kind of mitigation, if necessary, would have been very different than what was initially being proposed, assuming that that E. coli was actually coming from folks who were camping along the river. So that was a really productive use of eDNA that had direct management related implications. And that is the end of my presentation. So I will stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Lindsay. Any quick questions for Lindsay on what she presented before we dive into kind of the more meaty discussion about, okay, we've heard all these great projects and processes and implementation plans and potential, what and how can the council help move these things forward? Evelyn, I see your hands up.
Just a quick question, Lindsay, what do you expect to see with your, you want to do biodiversity trend analysis? What do you talk for a minute about that?
Yeah, so something that I'm hoping to potentially start doing is because we have generated so much data throughout this project all over the state, in a lot of areas where we have other water quality related data, is to try to start to basically bring the chemical and physical data that we've been very consistently generating as a part of our monitoring programs throughout many years here at the water boards, and bring the biological aspect into it and start to identify if there seem to be any noticeable trends in biodiversity that are related to other water quality related questions. So that could be looking at, it could just be on the most basic level, comparing it to the bioassessment data that we have, which is something that we've already been planning, but we could also then be comparing it to data that we're generating as a part of the other chemical constituents that we monitor for, or looking at comparing it to our bioaccumulation program data and different aspects like that, to really start to understand how we can bring biological data into the conversations and questions that we're asking as an agency and as a monitoring program. So that's something that's sort of a very big basket of things that could potentially be explored. And so I'm currently trying to identify like what the priorities would be in starting to do any kind of meta-analysis on this data. So that's sort of, oh, sorry.
I hope you will consider how it relates to drinking water, if there are connections there that you might see.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we could do.
Thank you.
Yeah. And something I forgot to mention that I wanted to mention just quickly is that there are more agencies within the last couple of years who've started their own inland waterway monitoring efforts using eDNA, including CDFW's been implementing a new eDNA module as a part of their cannabis monitoring program. The state parks have been starting an eDNA program, and DWR has been doing a lot of work with eDNA for a while now, but they've been just adding more and more to that. And so something I'm hoping to accomplish is to start to bring together some of the folks across these agencies, as well as the folks who work with these agencies directly to do this work, together to start having conversations about sort of what are our priorities more generally statewide when it comes to this. How can we like develop guidance that is usable across agencies and across sectors? And so hopefully that's something I can start to accomplish here within the next year or so, is starting to have conversations more broadly with folks who are doing eDNA on more of the inland side of things.
Great, thanks, Lindsay. If you need a place for that, we could always build a state-only subcommittee of the molecular methods work group. It's kind of an already built-in infrastructure if that's of interest.
That could be very cool. I would be into that.
Right on. Well, thanks again for taking the time. And so now, we've heard several great talks about eDNA and the potential and what we've done thus far. And, really the impetus for this discussion was not only to provide, awareness of all this great work that's being done or being started, but also to think about, what are the opportunities the council has and the tools that the council has at its disposal to continue to encourage this work and to maybe advance it further so it's an application at larger scale. So, California right now has kind of set the standard, especially for a lot of the work that's been done with the molecular methods work group as far as the setting up standard operating procedures and helping build resources on a larger scale. But how, what now? What can the council do? What can you all do to kind of keep the momentum moving forward and keep California in a position to be a lead role? Some of some of the things that when this topic was brought up by Steve Weisberg, that kind of came to mind was, we could, our primary tool has been making recommendations to the secretaries, but when we're doing that, we almost have to have very specific asks of the secretaries. So if we were to take that avenue, we would really need to kind of come up with, okay, these are very specific and discrete recommendations around the topic of eDNA that we think that should be pursued at the state level. Another idea that was thrown out by Steve was like, maybe we put a request, or maybe one of those recommendations is for the governor to write a letter to the White House applauding its work on the national strategy, but also encouraging at a federal level that they support the work that's being done at the state level, using the several examples that were kind of discussed today as how we are leading the work, but having a constant kind of issue with having resources and being spread thin. It's very easy for some of these projects to get put on the back burner because they aren't necessarily regulated or mandated. So like, how can we have to increase federal support for the work that we're doing here? And thirdly, another option that was thrown out was having a resolution or some sort of written support letter that could be used. I mean, we never really explored a resolution before. I'm not sure exactly what the resolution would look like, but if that was something that the council thought was a valuable use of its time, then that would really be a task for me to explore and kind of draft out. That would be a little bit different than, say, a support letter like I brought up earlier. Like we very often write support letters for folks looking for grant monies and other resources to support work that the council would support, or the work that would help support the work groups. But a resolution is something that was kind of a newer or novel idea that was presented by Steve. I'm not sure A, what that would look like, or B, who would necessarily care. But that's not to say that it wouldn't be of value. So I want to kind of open this up to the council and anybody here that's still online to kind of think about where you all see our role. And I see Steve coming off mute, so feel free.
Okay, I'll jump in. So I think the starting point is a recognition of how far along California is, both in numbers of projects and I guess I'll call it organizational structure through the Monitoring Council Workgroup. And so therefore we're uniquely positioned to help the feds move forward. Towards that end, I think writing a letter to the White House, whether it comes from the secretary, comes from the governor, doesn't matter. Maybe it comes from the council, although it probably is stronger if it comes from the secretaries or the governor. Identifying, first off, complimenting the federal agencies, complimenting the White House for developing a strategy, complimenting the implementation team, Kelly in particular, on how they've engaged us. But identifying that there are additional opportunities, or as you develop the implementation plan, here are three, I'll put forward three things which I think we want from them. The first is to take advantage of what we're doing with standardization. First off, we have a structure where we have 200 people in your work group, Susie. We're all working together. And if you look at monitoring in this country or in California, the state level monitoring efforts outpace the federal investments by more than 10 to 1. And so the feds to do it without coordinating with us would be a very bad thing. More importantly, we have ELAP, and the fact that Christine sits on the council and has expressed a willingness to be essentially the pilot for how we move not just to standardized methods, but to an accreditation process associated with that. So I think that's number one. I think number two is library development. It's fantastic that Pike has $9 million to do it. That covers one habitat. And even there, how do we leverage it? Pike's already doing a great job of that, because I know that the Smithsonian is planning to process a lot of the samples that are associated with that effort. So we should compliment on that and then just let them know what other efforts we want. But the second class of things we can interact on is library development. The third thing, I think, which is not been explicitly called out here, but I think the real piece that the feds are going to have challenges with is essentially pilot projects that go not just to how do we collect the data, how do we interpret it relative to a library, but how do we actually use it for making decisions? And Kelly knows about things called sandboxes that the feds are talking about, trying to find places and things that we can work on where we work together towards an endpoint. I think that could be a number of possibilities. Could be some of the beach water quality stuff, although that's so far along, I don't think we need it. I'm thinking more along the kind of things that Pike's project is not just to collect data for a library, it's to actually apply that to a management problem. How can the feds help us do that? How can they get involved in doing it, to co-design it? So I guess what I'm advocating for is some sort of resolution from the council leading to a letter, probably to the White House, probably from the secretaries of the governor. And then the letter highlight these three areas that we would like to see coordination. And not a single person telling me yes or no.
Kelly, I see your hands up. Sorry. I'm taking notes. So sorry. Go ahead. Kelly, I see your hands up, and then Christine.
Just a couple things. One, get your opinion on. Right now, we're moving toward from sandboxes, even though it was in that document, to something called showcases, because sandbox doesn't sound aquatic. I don't know, just sounds too dry. So if you think of a better word, this is the time to pipe up. Second, I think this is really interesting. And I think the White House is great, but probably even more important is getting to the White House isn't necessarily to your congressional representatives. And considering it looks like now, I just got a text that maybe there are 3 potential acts going on. Socializing at that level, because the White House, it doesn't make, if this stuff is to be funded, if it's to be more than just a nice idea, it's not socializing with the White House. In other words, you kind of already have them. They've already said, yep. So they're, so I would broaden that perhaps. And then my question to you is, does this group have the ability to speak to or get other states involved? So California is awesome, but California is known to be, on that cutting edge. And it would be great, to have the Gulf states get to that same place.
I think that, yeah, generally this council doesn't directly engage with other states necessarily, but that's not to say that my role as a director does. So like I mentioned earlier that I'm the EPA Region 9 state representative on the National Water Quality Monitoring Council, which had some issues. It used to be part of ACWI, and then it went under the Trump administration. the FACA's got kind of dismantled. So we've been kind of went from a USGS EPA headed group to basically US EPA leading the effort under Susan Holdsworth as the chair. But that's just to be said that is a national scale monitoring council where we talk about all things water quality and ecosystem monitoring across the states, both at the federal agency level, but also the state level. So that's an opportunity where I can bring this up through our monitoring assessment program meetings, at our national council meetings. We have other presentations that focus on specific topics, and eDNA has been one of them. So there is definitely an opportunity to engage through that group, which I'm not sure if you're even aware of, but that's one for sure. And I mentioned earlier that they have a national conference every 2 years, and the eDNA will be definitely a topic of several sessions at that conference in Green Bay, and that rotates a location. So I can definitely bring up that coordinated effort within that space. Christine.
Yeah, so thank you. So I just want to agree with Steve. I think that we should write a letter. I don't know to who, but we've been on this track as leaders. We've been leading in the PFAS investigatory orders. We're the first in the world to develop a microplastics method and a credit for it in California. And so we can do the same with eDNA. And I think there's easy markers to hit to be the leaders here. To get, this method moving towards defensible, reliable data so that the programs in California can use it and make decisions that are sound. So, and I'm here. I'm glad I can support everybody. So just let me know. I also want to say that I'm really hopeful for this standardization group that Susie's working with in ISO, because the biggest obstacle that we have is moving research methods into more standardized, validated methods that I could accredit across the state and over state lines. When methods aren't standardized and they're just developed in-house and not standardized, it makes it more difficult for me to make sure that everyone's doing things the same way. So I'm really hopeful for this group that Susie's working with through the international ISO standard.
Thanks, Christine. That's really helpful. I'm going to go to Ray and then to Evelyn.
Yeah, this is Ray. I think one of the important things is that the council can do, and I support Steve's thing about a resolution and a letter, is to kind of get the word out that this is something that, when you use words like cutting edge and things like that, it makes it sound like, well, maybe I can't do that, or maybe this still isn't quite right. But this is now standardized, and that this is something that can be done anywhere, and should be part of that menu of different monitoring options that you have. So just kind of just talking about how this was developed in California, but that's applicable, first of all, throughout California. I would suggest, Helen's not here, but I do a lot of monitoring work and nonprofits and stuff. Maybe putting this out through the clean water team about how this is done, the availability. I said just educating folks, and then those are people that talk to their congressional representatives and are going to want to see this as an option in grant funding and things like that. So I just thought I'd bring up that angle.
Yeah, well taken. And I know Susie has been working with Eric Burrs and the collaboration network, which is tied into the clean water team. But you're right, that is a resource that we definitely need to leverage. Evelyn and then Grant.
Steve, I wondered if you are aware of the letter that I sent over the last few years to the governor and legislators to help support funding for the monitoring council. From my experience, it feels like people are still not aware what the monitoring council is, what it's responsible for, its capacity, its potential. So I would suggest that a resolution, even with, I don't know how to go back, but to promoting the council internally in California is like one thing, because all the data that's generated could actually be used by legislators who are looking for data and trying to connect the dots. So I just wanted to bring that up, and I want to just reiterate the importance of the communication tools that the monitoring council is challenged with and given the responsibility to do, which I feel is also like undervalued. And Nick, I have a question. How is the National Monitoring Council funded?
Like I said, it used to be historically, before the Trump administration, it was funded by the Department of Interior and through USGS and US EPA as a partnership. And it served as an advisory committee to ACWI, ACWI, which no longer exists. But those types of advisory groups were basically just dismantled under the Trump administration. So right now it's basically being wholly funded by US EPA. As far as like putting on the conference, which is its main output, along with the water quality portal. And then all the state representatives like myself are just volunteer time.
I wonder if there's any way that the EPA can support funding for state councils. Since I think you shared that only Maryland is the only state that funds monitoring councils in the country.
That's one example of a state-funded monitoring council. Yeah, that's really active and proactive. The Maryland Water Quality Monitoring Council. But very few other states have a monitoring council that's independent. They either leverage the existing national council or just stay within their own state departments, their monitoring departments. My guess is EPA, based on the conversation we have around the conference, they don't have additional funds lying around to support us, but that's definitely an area where we have the ability to, and we have in the past and continue to spread and promote the work that's done here at a larger scale. Grant.
Yeah, thank you, Nick, and thank you everyone for the presentations. I'm going to be very brief and just advocate that one of the ways the council can help with broader adoption of these tools is advocating that they be incorporated into guidance manuals that are either currently in use or maybe need to be updated. And specifically, I'm thinking about the California Microbial Source Identification Manual, which is still very much the playbook I think that most stormwater agencies are using for microbial source ID work. It's a great manual, but it's now over 10 years old. It was developed in December of 2013 by the SQUIRP team and a whole host of other subject matter experts. So I'm not suggesting that the council take on the work of updating that manual, but just that if and when that manual is updated, I think the molecular methods work group can help inform how use of eDNA can provide a valuable tool for that MST work. And that's all I had. Thanks, Nick.
That's a great thought, Grant, that I haven't really thought of. But yeah, look for existing guidance tools that may be legacy, but that could be, there's an opportunity to update and include more of these emerging methods and technologies into those as part of updates. That's a really great idea. Thank you. And Caitlin, and I'll let you guys go after this. I'll circle back. The last item is basically just thinking about items for next time, but I know I've only asked you for your time up to 1 o'clock. So go ahead, Caitlin. You're unmuted.
Saying thank you. Going back just to this slide here, thinking, potential next steps is, letter, I know potentially to the White House team, there's, questions of like other federal appropriate entities, but whether that come from the governor could maybe a mix of the two first bullets have come from the EPA and CNRA secretaries, specifically to support leveraging between federal state partnerships if there's opportunities for federal in-kind partnerships, for example Smithsonian processing of samples, things like that, to help elevate how we can elevate this work, but also thinking about the National Water Quality Monitoring Council. Maybe there's an opportunity there for a very specific, just connecting the dots regionally, and back to Kelly's point of how we can better elevate this work nationally, and just putting that into a letter form, I think could be potentially impactful with very explicit asks.
Thanks, Caitlin. Okay, well, with the sake of time, I'll just say that thank you for everybody and their time, and for staying, those that have stayed the extra 4 minutes. I've got some marching orders, some action items to explore. It seems like there's pretty broad support on creating either a resolution and or a letter. I like the idea that Kelly gave about maybe the congressional representatives being a more targeted audience that maybe makes the more important decisions around funding. But yeah, brings recognition to the council and all the work that's been done within this space and others. And I'll circle back with the last item, which is basically what should we talk about next time. And thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.